Good evening, and welcome back to our quiet corner, where the gentle whispers of the past guide us into deep, restorative sleep. Tonight, we drift far away to a realm of ancient kings, forgotten isles, and love that crosses the boundaries of magic and the sea. Settle softly into your most comfortable place. Let the sounds of the night and the slow, steady rhythm of this story quiet your mind. As you close your eyes, allow the serene imagery of the Orient to begin its slow, hypnotic dance. Tonight, we begin the magnificent tale of Kamar al-Zaman and the beautiful Budur, a story of two royal souls who found an enchanted love while the world around them slept. Breathe deeply and let the first words of this long journey lead you toward a peaceful night. It is related, O auspicious king, that in the most ancient of times, there lived a mighty sultan whose name was Shahriman. He was the sovereign of the islands of Khalidan, a ruler beloved by his people for his great justice and his even temper. Sultan Shahriman governed his realm for many years in perfect peace and tranquility. Despite his magnificent palace and his boundless wealth, the sultan carried a deep sadness in his heart. The years had passed, and fortune had not yet blessed him with a son to inherit his throne. This worry weighed upon him, preventing his mind from finding true repose even in the quietest hours of the night. He spent his nights in prayer and reflection, often gazing up at the countless stars that shone over his island kingdom, seeking solace. One still and quiet night, after a long period of peaceful meditation, his queen, Hayat al-Nufus, was granted a beautiful vision of hope. Not long after, the court celebrated a joyous occasion that swept away all the sultan's deep-seated sorrow. His wife gave birth to a child of such extraordinary beauty that the sultan himself was utterly speechless. They named him Kamar al-Zaman, meaning Moon of the Age. The young prince Kamar al-Zaman grew up in the serene seclusion of the palace. His beauty was legendary even in his youth. He possessed a tranquil countenance, a brow as clear as a polished shell, and eyes that held the calm depth of a still lake. His gentle nature was matched only by the devotion of his teachers and nurses. When he reached the age of 15, the Sultan Shahriman summoned the viziers and his most trusted counselors to a great and luminous assembly. The hall was prepared with soft silks and lit by lamps that cast a golden, soothing glow. My wise counselors, the Sultan said, his voice slow and deliberate, you have seen my son, Prince Kamar al-Zaman. He is now ready to step into the world, and it is time for him to marry. We must secure a princess of noble lineage and gentle heart. The assembled dignitaries bowed their heads in respectful agreement. The prince, however, had been listening from a secluded balcony, and the idea of marriage did not sit well with his quiet soul. He considered the idea a distraction from his cherished books and his solitary strolls in the palace gardens. That very evening, as the moon rose high, casting long, peaceful shadows across the marble floors, the Sultan summoned his son. My dear Kamar al-Zaman, the Sultan began in a soft, coaxing tone. I have arranged to secure a bride for you. You are now a man, and the kingdom awaits your heir. It is your royal duty. The prince remained composed, but a flicker of resistance showed in his quiet eyes. "O my father, Sultan of all the islands," the prince replied, his voice clear and measured. "I beg of you, give me time. My heart is not yet open to the thoughts of marriage. I have no desire for the distractions of women. I wish only to dedicate my days to learning and the tranquility of thought." The Sultan tried every gentle argument he knew. He spoke of the beauty of a family, the duty to his ancestors, and the necessity of preserving the lineage. Yet the prince remained calm, his resolve rooted deep within his solitary spirit. "I will not marry, O my father," he repeated with the quiet finality of the sea tide. I will not be bound by a duty my heart does not yet understand. This refusal, delivered with such deep calm, stirred a quiet storm in the Sultan's heart. He did not raise his voice, but the look of deep disappointment in his eyes was heavy. The Sultan had never before faced such peaceful, unyielding disobedience. The next day, and the day after, the arguments continued in the palace halls, always ending in the same stalemate. The Sultan's frustrated patience against the prince's tranquil refusal. The prince sought his refuge in the cool, silent libraries, leaving the Sultan to fret. The people and the court began to murmur softly about the prince's strange aversion to marriage. The Sultan, fearing that his son's peaceful resistance would become a public scandal, made a final, desperate decision. He ordered that his son, Prince Kamar al-Zaman, be confined to the highest, most secluded tower of the palace, there to remain until his heart was softened and he agreed to the royal marriage. And so the gentle prince was led to his quiet, gilded prison. The doors were sealed, and Kamar al-Zaman was left alone, watching the slow passage of the clouds from his solitary window. The gentle prince Kamar al-Zaman now rests in his secluded tower, gazing upon the world that he has chosen to reject for the time being. The deep silence of his prison will soon be broken by a magic that he could never have anticipated. Tonight, we leave him there, in the quiet embrace of the ancient castle walls, waiting for a fate that is far grander than his simple wish for solitude. May the peace of the islands of Caladan settle upon your spirit. Rest well, let your thoughts drift away with the ancient winds, and dream of marble towers and clear, starlit nights. We shall continue the story of Kamar al-Zaman and the magnificent enchantment that awaits him tomorrow, or whenever you seek the deep comfort of our next tale. Sleep deeply and be well. Prince Kamar al-Zaman remained in his tower, dwelling on his father's anger. Though sad, his mood was still and contemplative. He spent his days in quiet reflection, and his nights gazing at the slow passage of the clouds. The only sounds were the distant, soothing calls of the night birds and the gentle stirring of the desert wind. The Sultan Shahriman, meanwhile, was filled with profound sorrow. He could not eat nor rest, consumed by the failure of his son's obedience. He retired early to his bedchamber, but sleep offered no refuge. That night, as the Sultan lay in his bed, distressed and awake, the sky was utterly dark. Suddenly, the chamber walls seemed to vanish, and a great calming light filled the air. Two enormous, winged figures descended softly, landing with the quiet grace of falling feathers. These were two Jinn, creatures of immense power and presence, whose bodies were formed of subtle, smokeless fire. The first was Maimunah, daughter of the king of the Jinn. The second was Danhasch, a powerful Ifrit, son of the chief of the Jinn. They began to speak in soft, resonating voices, their tones like the distant chime of ancient bells. "Tell me, O Maimunah," began Danhasch, his voice echoing mildly, "whence comest thou? For you seem joyous and filled with a rare tranquility." Maimunah replied, "I come from the far isles of China. I have journeyed across the world to visit a beautiful princess, the only daughter of King Gaer. Her name is Budur, which means full moon. I tell you, Danhasch, the earth holds no greater beauty than hers. Her face shines like the very sun." Danhasch paused, the light around him dimming slightly in doubt. "You speak wonders, O Maimunah. Yet I have just come from the islands of Caladan, where I witnessed the most beautiful being the stars have ever looked upon. He is Prince Kamar al-Zaman, the son of Sultan Shahriman, now confined to his tower. I swear by the virtue of our race that no woman can rival his magnificent presence." And so the two Jinn began a quiet ancient debate, each arguing that the one they had seen, Budur, the princess, or Kamar al-Zaman, the prince, was the most beautiful creature in existence. "I challenge you, Danhasch," Maimunah declared softly. "Let us take flight this very instant. We shall lift Prince Kamar al-Zaman and carry him in his sleep to the palace of Princess Budur. We shall lay them side by side. Then let us see which of the two truly surpasses the other in beauty." Danhasch agreed immediately. With a single silent rush of air, they ascended through the ceiling, dissolving into the night sky. In the secluded tower, Kamar al-Zaman was deep in a peaceful, quiet sleep. The Jinn gently lifted the prince, mattress and all, and with a silent promise of enchantment, they began their swift flight across the continents and the tranquil seas toward the Isles of China. The Jinn flew for a single magical hour, crossing oceans that glittered under the moon. Finally, they arrived at the palace of King Gaer. They settled softly into the chamber of Princess Budur, who lay sleeping peacefully in her royal bed, surrounded by candles that cast a dim, golden light. The two Jinn placed the sleeping Kamar al-Zaman next to the princess. Maimunah and Danhasch then stood back, their light shimmering gently, and gazed upon the two perfectly still, beautiful beings. They began their quiet, profound judgment. The two rivals in beauty, Kamar al-Zaman and Budur, now lie side by side, yet each is utterly unaware of the other's magical presence. The two Jinn, Maimunah and Danhasch, gazed upon the sleeping figures. The light that emanated from them cast a soft, tranquil glow across the chamber. They observed the prince, Kamar al-Zaman, whose face possessed a calm, radiant look, and the princess, Budur, whose features held a delicate, serene majesty. "Look, Danhasch," Maimunah began, her voice a soothing murmur. "I ask you in fairness, is there any earthly wonder to equal the beauty of my Princess Budur?" Danhasch replied, his voice equally calm. "Oh, Maimunah, I see that your Princess Budur is indeed fair. Her features are elegant, her brow noble. But look also upon my prince, Kamar al-Zaman. Observe the flawless curve of his profile, the peaceful line of his closed mouth, and the perfect tranquility of his form. By the virtue of all ancient magic, he is the more beautiful." Maimunah sighed softly, expressing her disagreement. "It seems, O Ifrit, that your judgment is clouded by the love of your own discovery. I say the Princess Budur is incomparably superior. Look at her hair, black as the still midnight, spread upon the silken pillows. And I say," retorted Danhasch gently, "that the prince is yet more wonderful. His cheeks are smooth as ivory, and his very repose holds the majesty of a young king. He is the sun, and she is merely the bright moon." Their quiet debate continued for a time, a beautiful contest of wills. Finally, in a moment of playful contention, Maimunah was prompted by the Ifrit to examine the prince's body closely. To convince her, Danhasch lightly lifted the soft covers from Kamar al-Zaman. Maimunah beheld the prince's magnificence. She found herself utterly stunned by the perfection of his sleeping form. After a long silence, she conceded, her voice barely a whisper, "Indeed, Danhasch, you have won this contest. This prince is more beautiful than my Princess Budur. He is truly the wonder of the age." Danhasch, pleased, then suggested a final, profound jest. He slipped a valuable ring from the prince's finger and placed it upon the finger of the sleeping Princess Budur. Maimunah, in turn, took a magnificent necklace of pearls from the princess and placed it around the neck of the sleeping prince. They intended this exchange of jewels to be a silent, powerful charm, binding the two souls who slept side by side. They then agreed to return each royal to their own palace, as silently and swiftly as they had brought them. Once more, with a soft, gentle breath of magic, the two Jinn lifted the sleeping prince Kamar al-Zaman. They flew back across the quiet waters and the sleeping lands, returning him to his secluded tower in the islands of Caladan. They settled him softly onto his bed and vanished with the first faint hint of dawn. Princess Budur, meanwhile, remained in her chamber in China. The sun rose, casting a golden light through her window, warming the chamber. She began to stir, feeling the strange weight of a necklace she did not remember putting on. She opened her eyes, finding herself alone, yet wearing the magnificent pearls. She sat up in wonder, touching the cold metal of the strange ring upon her finger. She called for her handmaidens. "Where did this necklace come from?" she demanded softly. "And this ring? I recall neither of them. Was anyone here in the quiet of the night?" The maidens swore by the heavens that the chamber had been sealed and guarded, and no one had entered. They only saw the pearls and the ring, and whispered among themselves that some great magic must have touched the princess in her slumber. The handmaidens of Princess Budur were utterly bewildered, gazing at the magnificent necklace of pearls and the foreign ring on their lady's hand. As they whispered about the nature of the enchantment, the princess remained deep in thought, her eyes fixed on the strange ring. She realized it was a man's ring, large and cold upon her delicate finger. A profound and inexplicable sadness began to settle over her heart. The princess, who had always preferred solitude and stillness, suddenly felt a change within her. She was consumed by the memory of a face she could not recall and a presence that had been near. The sight of the ring and the necklace filled her with longing, yet she did not know what she longed for. She spent the entire day in her chamber, weeping softly, her sorrow disturbing the calm atmosphere of the palace. King Gaer, her father, noticed the sudden and deep distress of his daughter. Concerned by her unusual melancholy, he summoned her chief nurse. "What ails my daughter, the Princess Budur?" he asked. "She has always been the image of tranquility, and now she is consumed by grief." The nurse, herself perplexed, described the mysterious appearance of the necklace and the ring, and the princess's constant, silent weeping. The king, sensing dark magic at work, immediately summoned his chief counselors and the most learned astrologers in his kingdom. They gathered in a quiet, secluded hall, lit by soft lamplight. After careful deliberation and the examination of the strange jewels, the wise men concluded that some potent Jinn had visited the princess and had charmed her heart. They declared that the princess was suffering from an enchantment of separation. She had seen her destined love in a dream or in a magical moment, and now that he was gone, her soul grieved for his absence. To break this dark spell of longing, the astrologers advised the king to arrange for her immediate marriage to the first prince of noble lineage who came seeking her hand. This, they believed, would distract her heart and force the strange image from her mind. King Gaer, desperate to restore his daughter's peace, agreed to the council. He dispatched envoys across all the vast and tranquil kingdoms, seeking a handsome and gentle prince to marry Budur. Meanwhile, far across the sea, Prince Kamar al-Zaman awoke in his isolated tower in the islands of Caladan. He felt a profound sense of wonder. He too had a vague, powerful memory of a fleeting dream, a beautiful face, soft silks, and a scent like rare sandalwood. He stretched his hand and noticed the heavy weight of the necklace around his neck. It was a woman's necklace, woven with magnificent pearls that shone with an inner light. He instantly knew it was not his own. He also felt the absence of his favorite ring. Kamar al-Zaman immediately called the keeper of the tower. "How came this necklace upon my neck?" he demanded, his voice calm but firm. The keeper, terrified, swore by the heavens that the door had remained sealed and guarded throughout the night, and no one had entered or left. The keeper believed the prince had concealed the necklace himself to prove a point to his father. The prince, however, understood instantly that some powerful, unseen hand, perhaps the same Jinn who were always rumored to visit the high towers, had been at work. He too felt the profound, unexplained sadness that had gripped Budur. He longed intensely for the beautiful owner of the necklace, whose face he could no longer clearly recall. When the Sultan Shahriman visited the prince the following day, found his son staring blankly out of the window, his eyes glazed with melancholy, wearing the massive pearl necklace. The sight enraged the Sultan, who believed this was another trick to avoid marriage. "You have been visited by women, or you conjured this spell yourself," the Sultan raged, the first true anger showing in his voice. Kamar al-Zaman, deep in his lovesick trance, merely pointed to the necklace. "I swear, O father, I know not how it came here, but the owner of this jewel is my true destiny. If you wish me to marry, bring me the owner of this pearl necklace, for I will accept no other." This demand further convinced the Sultan that his son was completely mad. He ordered the prince's continued confinement, but he sent secret messengers to search the lands for a princess wearing a matching ring, hoping to cure the prince's sudden, quiet madness. Thus, both royal families began a frantic search across the ancient world for a lost jewel and a mysterious stranger. The messengers dispatched by the two sultans began their long, tranquil journeys. The Sultan Shahriman's envoys traveled by sea and land, carrying descriptions of the strange pearl necklace and searching for a princess who wore a massive, distinctive man's ring. Meanwhile, King Gair's messengers traveled to distant shores, describing the foreign man's ring and seeking a prince who wore the unique pearl necklace. The vastness of the sea and the slowness of ancient travel meant that many quiet months passed in silence. The two princes, Kamar al-Zaman and Princess Budur, remained confined, each one growing paler and thinner, consumed by a quiet, consuming melancholy for a face they could barely recall. The stillness of their confinement deepened their longing, as they gazed only at the jewels that were their only link to the strange shared dream. Eventually, the envoys of Sultan Shahriman arrived in the mighty city of the Princess Budur's father, King Gair. They stayed in a secluded and near the great port, resting from their long sea journey. Unaware of the king's own secret search, they began to show the image of the ring they sought, describing the unusual necklace their prince wore. They spoke to the quiet merchants in the bazaar and the solemn guards at the palace gates, always asking the same delicate question. The citizens and merchants of that city were utterly astonished. They instantly recognized the ring from the king's own palace and knew of its mysterious appearance. When the envoys described the necklace, which was known to have adorned Princess Budur, the news reached the king instantly through his most trusted servants. King Gair, overjoyed but cautious, immediately summoned the chief of the envoys to his private, secluded chamber. He offered them gentle refreshments and soft cushions. "Tell me, O stranger," the king commanded in a tone both excited and calm, "where did you see this necklace? And who is the prince who wears it and searches for its owner?" The chief envoy spoke softly, detailing the entire story, how Prince Kamar al-Zaman had rejected marriage until a magical night when he awoke wearing the pearl necklace, and how his longing for the unknown owner had driven him to quiet madness. He described the prince's magnificent appearance and his peaceful, unyielding refusal to marry any other. King Gair listened with profound astonishment and mounting relief. He realized that the very same powerful magic that had stricken his daughter had also visited this prince. "By the virtue of the heavens," the king murmured, his voice filled with emotion, "this is the spouse destined for my daughter. Our sorrows are at an end. Fate has brought them together, though by a strange and unseen hand." The king ordered that the envoys be treated with the utmost courtesy and grace, providing them with beautiful quarters and soft silks, and preparing them for a long stay in the peaceful city. He then sent a quiet, urgent message back to Sultan Shahriman, confirming the discovery of the necklace's owner and inviting the Sultan to travel to his kingdom to unite the two royal children and restore their health and tranquility. Sultan Shahriman received the joyful news with deep gratitude and immediately ordered a massive naval fleet to be prepared. The great ships were adorned with banners and soft, colored lanterns, and laden with gifts of silks, spices, and precious metals. The Sultan and his entire court, including the now frail but hopeful Prince Kamar al-Zaman, embarked on a long, serene sea voyage toward the Isles of China. The Sultan ensured that the prince's journey was made comfortable, with soft music and gentle breezes guided by the sails. The sea journey was long and the water was calm, the ships gliding softly over the water for many months. Meanwhile, Princess Budur, still confined and sad, continued to wear the ring and wonder at her strange fate. She had no idea that her true destiny, and the end of her profound sorrow, was now sailing peacefully toward her island home. When the magnificent fleet finally arrived at the shores of King Gaer's kingdom, the welcoming celebrations were grand and peaceful. The air was filled with soft music and the scent of jasmine. The two great sultans met with deep mutual respect. Sultan Shahriman told the entire story of his son's confinement and sudden love, and King Gaer recounted the parallel tale of his daughter's sorrow and the strange appearance of the man's ring. The two kings then decreed that the marriage should take place without any further delay, hoping to quickly restore health and peace to the two afflicted royal children. They resolved to tell the two young royals the strange shared history of the ring and the necklace once the ceremony was complete and their peace of mind was fully restored. They desired the union to be celebrated under a sky of calm serenity, without the burden of the past mystery. The wedding preparations commenced in the palace of King Gaer with speed, yet maintaining an atmosphere of tranquil beauty. The halls were draped in soft, expensive silks, and the air was filled with the gentle, calming scent of rosewater and sandalwood. The kings decided to perform the marriage ceremony that very evening, believing that only the immediate union could soothe the restless hearts of the prince and princess. As the sun began to set, casting long, peaceful shadows, Princess Budur was prepared for the wedding night. Her handmaidens dressed her in gowns of shimmering silk and gold, but her heart remained heavy, still fixed upon the mystery of the ring she wore. She was beautiful beyond compare, yet her eyes held a profound sadness and longing. She went to the royal bedchamber, which had been prepared with the utmost care, and lay upon the soft cushions, awaiting her unknown groom. She felt no joy, only a quiet resignation to the fate her father had chosen. Meanwhile, Prince Kamar al-Zaman was led by his father, Sultan Shahriman, toward the bridal chamber. The prince's mind was distant and troubled, consumed by the memory of the beautiful face he could not quite grasp, and the necklace that had become his obsession. He was dressed in magnificent robes, but his demeanor was one of quiet distraction. The Sultan gave his son a final, gentle instruction, urging him to be kind and tender to his bride, and then left the prince at the door of the chamber. Kamar al-Zaman entered the great chamber and saw, dimly lit by the quiet candles, the figure of the Princess Budur lying still upon the bed. He approached slowly, his steps cushioned by the thick, luxurious carpets. His eyes, accustomed only to the solitude of his tower, were confused by the dim light and the heavy perfume of the room. He sat quietly beside the princess. Seeing her stillness and her delicate, sorrowful expression, his heart did not immediately fill with love, but with a deep, shared melancholy. He remained silent for a long time, simply observing the solemnity of the room and the figure beside him. Finally he spoke, his voice low and measured. "O princess, I know not what affliction has brought us to this strange meeting, but I pray that our union may bring peace to your troubled heart." The princess, still veiled, turned her head slightly. The sound of his voice did not move her. She replied with a voice soft as falling snow, "O my lord, I too am afflicted by a grief I cannot name. I have been forced into this marriage by a magic that stole my peace, and I can only hope that fate will restore my lost tranquility." Kamar al-Zaman, hearing her words, felt his own sadness deepen. He reached out and touched the princess's hand. His fingers brushed against the large ring he recognized instantly, the ring that was missing from his own finger, the one he had worn for years. In that moment, the powerful memory of the Jinn, the magical flight, and the face that lay beside him in the secret moment of slumber rushed back to him with overwhelming clarity. This was the vision. This was the destiny he had seen. He snatched his hand back. "By the power of the heavens," he exclaimed, his quiet composure breaking, "you are the thief. You are the one who stole my ring, the object of my sorrow and my madness." Princess Budur, now equally shocked, unveiled herself completely. Her eyes widened, focusing on the prince's neck. She saw the familiar necklace of pearls, the jewel that had vanished from her own throat. "No, prince," she cried, a sudden powerful rage replacing her sorrow. "It is you who is the thief. You stole my necklace. You are a man of ill will who snuck into my chamber by black arts and charmed me. Give me back my necklace at once." The quiet chamber was instantly filled with accusations. Kamar al-Zaman insisted the ring was stolen from him by magic. Budur insisted the necklace was stolen from her. The planned union of comfort immediately dissolved into a bitter, furious argument. They sat for the rest of the night, their backs turned to each other, consumed by anger and suspicion, while the peaceful palace slept unaware of the storm brewing within the bridal chamber. As the sun rose over the peaceful kingdom of China, casting a soft golden glow upon a palace walls, the great sultans, Shahriman and Gayer, awaited news of the newlywed couple. They were filled with hopeful anticipation, believing that the sight of each other would have cured the quiet madness that had consumed their children. They sent the chief nurse and the prince's personal attendant to the chamber door, with instructions to inquire gently about the royal couple's repose. The two attendants approached the bridal chamber with silent reverence. They paused outside, expecting to hear the soft whispers of a happy union, but they heard nothing. The silence itself felt heavy and unnatural. Cautiously, the nurse tapped softly on the carved wooden door. When no answer came, they pushed the door open slightly and peered into the chamber. The lamps had almost burned out, and the room was filled with a dim, uncertain light. They saw the prince and the princess, each lying on opposite sides of the massive bed, their backs turned resolutely away from each other. The atmosphere was thick with cold silence and unresolved conflict. The chief nurse stepped forward gently. "May the morning bring you peace, O Princess Budur," she whispered. "And you, Prince Kamar al-Zaman. We pray that your shared tranquility has been restored." The Princess Budur turned suddenly, her eyes blazing with a quiet but intense fury. "Tranquility? There is no peace here, O nurse. Tell my father that this man is a wicked thief who snuck into my chamber by magic and stole my most precious jewel. I demand justice." Prince Kamar al-Zaman also turned, his face etched with pale anger. "Tell my father, O attendant, that this woman is a sorceress. She stole my ancestral ring by trickery and enchantment. She shall not remain my wife until my property is restored and her black arts are revealed." The attendants exchanged looks of sheer horror and confusion. They had expected joy and healing, not a furious confrontation. They tried gently to mediate, speaking of the king's great hopes and the destiny that had brought them together, but their words were met with cold refusal. The nurse and the attendant rushed back to the two kings, their faces pale with distress. They recounted the entire scene in hushed tones, the prince and princess refusing to speak to each other, the furious accusations of theft, and the absolute refusal to consummate the marriage. The kings were struck dumb by the report. Sultan Shahriman, regaining his composure, spoke first. "This is not mere madness, O King Gair. This is the deepest, darkest enchantment. The Jinn must have played a far more malicious jest upon them than we first imagined." King Gair, equally distraught, nodded slowly. "We must go ourselves to the chamber, O Sultan. We must reason with them and command them to speak of what truly happened." The two kings, accompanied by a small retinue, proceeded slowly to the bridal chamber. They entered the room, and the prince and princess immediately sat up, maintaining the great distance between them. Sultan Shahriman approached his son, his voice softened by pity. "My dear Kamar al-Zaman, what is the meaning of this foolishness? This is your wedding night. This is your wife, the beautiful Princess Budur. Why do you accuse her of theft?" The prince held up the pearl necklace. "Oh, my father, the thief is she. She stole my ring, which I wore every day, and she left this worthless trinket in its place. Send her away and find me the owner of my true jewel." King Gair turned to his daughter, his voice rising in alarm. "Budur, my sweet child, how can you speak of such wickedness? This prince has traveled across the seas to save you from your sorrow. Why do you accuse him?" Princess Budur pointed at the necklace around a prince's neck. "Oh, my father, I swear by the life of my mother, that is my necklace. This man is a wicked stranger, and he stole it from my throat while I slept. He left this foul ring upon my finger as a sign of his dark power. I refuse him, and I demand my necklace back." The two kings looked at the two beautiful, estranged figures, each wearing the other's most cherished possession, consumed by a fierce, unreasonable anger. They realized that the Jinn had not only united them, but had also planted a seed of suspicion that made their union impossible. The kings were caught between a profound, magical problem and the public shame of a ruined wedding. The two rulers could only watch as their children continued their quiet, tragic confrontation. The situation in the bridal chamber remained tense and sorrowful. The two powerful sultans stood helplessly, caught between the fierce pride of their children and the confusing reality of the stolen jewels. They tried every gentle tactic to restore peace. Sultan Shahriman pleaded with his son, reminding him of the long journey and the hopes of the two kingdoms. King Gaer spoke softly to his daughter, emphasizing the sanctity of the royal union. "My dear Kamar al-Zaman," the Sultan urged, his voice heavy with sadness. "Even if there was a mistake concerning these jewels, surely the beauty of your bride and the happiness of your people should outweigh this foolish quarrel. Put aside this anger and embrace your destiny." The prince remained unmoved, staring coldly at the ring on Budur's hand. "O father, my soul is bound to that ring. Until it is returned, I see only the thief who wears it. She is nothing to me but a stranger who has wronged my honor." King Gaer, turning to his daughter, spoke with rising desperation. "Budur, my life, can you not see that the prince is handsome and gentle? Can you not forgive the confusion over this necklace and fulfill your duty? Your health and happiness depend on this union." The princess was equally unyielding. "O father, how can I accept a man who accuses me of theft on our very wedding night? This necklace is a mark of my royal status, and he wears it as a trophy of his deceit. I will not look upon him until the necklace is rightfully returned." Realizing that reason and gentle pleading were useless against the power of the magical enchantment, the two kings retired from the chamber, leaving the prince and princess to their cold and silent standoff. They convened a secret council in the inner halls of the palace. The mood was one of deep frustration and quiet shame. They agreed that the shame of dissolving the marriage immediately would be catastrophic, causing wars and irreparable rifts between their mighty kingdoms. "We must find a way to compel them," King Gaer stated, his voice low and firm. "We shall not speak of this quarrel to the court. We shall command the guards to seal the chamber doors again. They will remain confined for a full year. Surely the necessity of company and the passing of time will soften their resistance and overcome the magic of the Jinn." Sultan Shahriman agreed reluctantly, his heart heavy for his son. "It is a harsh solution, but the peace of our kingdoms demands it. We shall announce to the court that the prince and princess desire a year of seclusion to know each other, and that no one, under pain of death, shall disturb their deep privacy." And so, the strange confinement began. The prince and princess were prisoners of their own stubborn pride and the subtle magic of the Jinn. Servants were instructed to leave their meals at the sealed door and to attend to their needs without ever speaking a word of the outside world. For an entire year, the magnificent royal couple lived in the utmost isolation. Yet the passing days brought no reconciliation. They maintained the same cold distance, sitting at opposite ends of the great chamber. Their conversation remained restricted to bitter accusations regarding the jewels. The tranquility the kings had hoped for never came. Instead, the chamber became a silent tomb of pride and unresolved magical conflict. They continued to eat, sleep, and wake in the same room, but they were worlds apart. The Princess Budur, filled with resentment, would often weep softly into her pillow, longing for her necklace. Prince Kamar al-Zaman, consumed by his desire for the ring, would pace the floor, his thoughts dark and disturbed. The only change was that, due to their shared long sorrow, their mutual beauty began to fade slightly, replaced by the pale cast of deep melancholy. Their shared agony was palpable, yet neither would yield a single inch. The year of seclusion finally drew to a close. The great doors of the bridal chamber were slowly unlocked by the chamberlain, who entered with a quiet, heavy heart. The atmosphere that met him was not one of peace, but of profound, unsettling stillness. Prince Kamar al-Zaman and Princess Budur sat as far apart as possible, their faces pale and their eyes devoid. They looked less like royal newlyweds and more like two marble statues separated by an ancient, tragic rift. The chamberlain rushed to inform the two sultans of the utter failure of their plan. The kings entered the room, their expressions a mix of deep disappointment and renewed alarm. They spoke again to their children, pleading for reconciliation, but the prince and princess were relentless in their demands and accusations. Kamar al-Zaman refused to recognize Budur until his ring was returned, and Budur refused to forgive Kamar al-Zaman until her necklace was restored. The power of the Jinns' jest proved stronger than a year of continuous proximity. Faced with this complete stalemate, the kings had no choice but to acknowledge the failure publicly. They convened a quiet council and announced to the court that, due to the prince's ongoing melancholy and their daughter's frail health, the marriage would be postponed until their spirits were mended. Sultan Shahriman, deeply ashamed and worried for his son, decided it was time to return to the islands of Khaldun, promising to seek every known remedy to cure his son's troubled mind. The parting was somber. The two sultans embraced with sad affection, and Sultan Shahriman embarked with his court, taking his stubborn, lovesick son back across the calm seas. As Kamar al-Zaman sailed away, he wore the pearl necklace like a mark of eternal sorrow, still longing for the owner of the ring. Back in China, Princess Budur found herself in a precarious position. The news of the failed marriage and the strange conflict spread quietly among the nobility, fueling rumors of enchantment. Furthermore, there was a pressing political matter. The King of India, whose name was Sher Khan, had been a suitor for Princess Budur's hand long before the arrival of Prince Kamar al-Zaman. King Gayer had made a solemn promise to him. Now, Sher Khan was sailing toward the kingdom with his mighty fleet to claim his promised bride. Princess Budur, now fiercely and secretly devoted to the image of the handsome pale prince who wore her pearls, despite their quarrel, could not bear the thought of marrying Sher Khan. She had seen the one man destined for her, and she would accept no other. The thought of this second, forced marriage plunged her into a renewed state of quiet despair. She devised a quiet plan. She stopped speaking altogether and refused all food and comfort. She lay motionless in her bed, mimicking the signs of a body and soul wasting away from a terminal magical illness. When King Gayer approached her, she would only look at him with large, tearful eyes, holding the ring tightly in her hand. The king, in utter panic at his daughter's rapid decline, once again summoned his viziers and physicians. They examined her gently, finding no earthly ailment, but concluding that her spirit was dying from the persistent enchantment of separation. They warned King Gayer that unless the original cause of her longing was returned, she would surely perish. To save his daughter from Sher Khan and from herself, King Gayer took a desperate measure. He ordered a small, secluded house to be prepared outside the palace walls, overlooking the sea. He declared that Princess Budur was suffering from a dreadful, contagious illness and ordered her confinement there, surrounded only by her most trusted female slaves. This, he reasoned, would protect her from the King of India's claim and give her the necessary isolation to recover her spirit. The news of Princess Budur's sudden and severe illness reached the shores of China just as the fleet of King Sher Khan of India appeared on the horizon. King Gayer sent solemn messengers to the Indian monarch, explaining with deep sorrow that his daughter, the promised bride, was afflicted by a mysterious and dangerous illness, requiring her complete, isolated quarantine. King Sher Khan, a ruler known for his patience and calm temperament, was greatly disappointed but accepted the news with dignity. He announced that he would remain in China for a full year, spending his time in quiet contemplation and hunting, hoping that the princess would recover. He established his large camp outside the capital city, maintaining a serene, watchful presence. Princess Budur, meanwhile, settled into her small, secluded house overlooking the quiet sea. The house was humble compared to the palace, but it offered her the profound solitude she craved. She spent her days gazing at the distant horizon, holding the prince's ring tightly in her hand, still consuming herself with sorrowful longing for the owner of the pearl necklace. Her handmaidens served her in respectful silence, ensuring her quiet comfort and solitude. She continued to refuse food, maintaining her illusion of severe illness. King Gaer, worried about his daughter's rapidly deteriorating health, which was now becoming genuine due to her emotional turmoil and lack of food, made a desperate move. He sent messengers to the chief vizier of his neighboring kingdom, asking for advice. This vizier was known throughout the lands for his deep wisdom, his knowledge of magic, and his gentle heart. The vizier arrived swiftly and was led into the small, quiet house by the sea. He approached Princess Budur, who lay weak and pale upon her cushions. He observed the necklace of pearls and the man's ring, and immediately understood the true nature of her affliction. He realized that the Jinn had done more than simply exchange jewels. They had exchanged the hearts of the two young royals. The wise vizier spoke to the princess in a soft, kind voice, encouraging her to speak of her pain. Budur, touched by his gentle manner, finally broke her silence. She recounted the entire miraculous story, the night she was carried away in her sleep, the sight of the beautiful prince lying beside her, the argument, and the subsequent exchange of the jewels. The vizier listened patiently, his face grave. "O princess," he said calmly, "the Jinn indeed cursed you, but the curse is born of powerful love. You have been united with your true destiny. But now your true affliction is not illness, but your fear of the King of India. This pretense of sickness must end, and a plan of action must begin." He devised a quiet, cunning plan. He ordered the princess to change her appearance entirely. He had her magnificent hair shaved completely and dressed her in the plain, humble robes of a young male slave, concealing her majestic form. He then placed a large turban on her head, obscuring her feminine features. "O princess," the vizier instructed her softly, "you shall pretend to be a young man named Gaer, a slave recently purchased by your father. I shall take you with me, and we shall travel far away from this kingdom in the eyes of King Shirkan. You must never betray your true identity until we find the young prince who wears your pearls." Budur, seeing the chance to actively seek her beloved Kamar al-Zaman, agreed immediately. That very night, she left the small, quiet house, disguised as a young man, in the silent company of the wise vizier. They traveled secretly to the coast, embarked upon a small, swift vessel, and began their long, perilous search for the islands of Caladan, leaving the desolate King Gaer and the watchful King Shirkan behind in the stillness of the dawn. The disguised Princess Budur, now known by her assumed name Gaer, began her long and perilous journey with the wise vizier. They sailed upon a small, swift vessel, moving quietly across the calm, dark waters toward the western horizon, seeking the distant islands of Caladan, the homeland of Prince Kamar al-Zaman. The sea was vast and silent, reflecting the multitude of stars that shone with a cool, peaceful light overhead. Budur, though exhausted from her months of feigned illness and emotional turmoil, felt a profound sense of peace take root in her heart. For the first time, she was actively pursuing her destiny and escaping the stagnant, confining political constraints of her father's court. She spent her days gazing at the distant, shimmering horizon, clutching the prince's ring under her simple robes, her deep-seated hope outweighing her lingering fear. The gentle rocking motion of the small boat became a soothing rhythm, lulling her into a state of quiet reflection. The vizier, a man of deep faith and quiet composure, watched over her like a dedicated father, ensuring her comfort and solitude during the long and contemplative voyage. Their journey was serene for many weeks. The sea remained tranquil and flat, and the vessel glided smoothly, carried only by gentle, favorable breezes that barely disturbed the surface of the water. The vizier used the long, quiet hours to teach Budur the manners and subtle deportment of a young merchant, instructing her in the necessary stillness and quiet confidence required to maintain her disguise. Budur, being naturally intelligent and calm, learned quickly, her serene, noble demeanor lending great authenticity to her role as the quiet, scholarly young man. They spoke only in hushed tones about the map and the route, their voices barely carrying over the soft lapping of the water against the hull. However, as they approached the region of the Great Isles, where the currents of the deep ocean met the coastal flows, the weather turned suddenly and violently. The change was swift and brutal. The sea, which had been a mirror of tranquility, became a roaring, chaotic expanse of dark, troubled water. A furious storm erupted with a terrible force, tossing their small vessel about like a leaf caught in an unstoppable wind. The calm, seasoned sailors were unable to control the ship as it was battered mercilessly by the mountain-high waves. The darkness of the storm was absolute, broken only by the terrifying, momentary flashes of lightning. The vizier, realizing the imminent, terrifying danger, tried to comfort the frightened slaves and sailors with soft, reassuring words. He commanded Budur to remain composed and to pray for safety and deliverance. But the storm raged with a demonic fury that defied all human skill and prayer. The ship's main mast was snapped in half with a deafening crack, and the hull began to take on water quickly through gaping structural wounds. The desperate shouts of the sailors were swallowed instantly by the thunderous roar of the wind and the crashing waves, creating a terrible symphony of chaos. The vizier, knowing the end of their voyage was near and recognizing the cold finality of the sea, clasped Budur's hand one last time and spoke to her in a desperate, quiet whisper, struggling against the wind. "Oh, my daughter, fate has turned violently against us. If we are separated by these angry waters, you must hold fast to your identity as Gaer. Never, under any circumstance, reveal that you are the Princess Budur. You must save yourself. Go to the islands of Kaladin, seek out Sultan Shahriman, and show him the ring. Tell him your tale of love and loss, and God will guide you safely to your prince." As he finished speaking, a massive, unforgiving wave, towering over the broken vessel, crashed over the deck, tearing the vizier from the princess's grasp with irresistible force. Budur watched in horror as his wise, gentle face, his last link to her home, vanished beneath the churning foam, pulled down by the furious water. She cried out in despair, but her voice was instantly lost in the wind. Instinctively, she desperately grabbed hold of a large, heavy plank of the ruined ship as the vessel broke apart into splinters beneath her. Clinging tightly to the piece of wood, Budur was thrown about mercilessly by the relentless storm. She was utterly alone, floating in the middle of a vast, unforgiving ocean, her mail disguise wet and heavy, but her grip on the prince's ring never wavered. The storm continued its terrifying assault for the remainder of the long, dark night, a test of her spirit and her will to survive. Just as the faint, exhausted light of dawn began to break, painting the sky with pale, hopeful colors, the storm finally subsided, leaving the sea calm but desolate and littered with debris. Budur lay half-conscious upon a plank, her body aching with cold and fatigue. She wept softly for the loss of the kind vizier, her faithful protector, but her quiet determination soon returned. She saw a distant shape on the horizon, a large, dark, wooded island, silent and still. Using the last fragile reserves of her strength, she slowly began to paddle the heavy plank toward the silent, beckoning shore, driven by the sole purpose of finding her prince. Princess Budur, clinging desperately to the heavy plank, finally reached the quiet shore of the unknown island. Her body was numb with cold, and every muscle protested the effort, but her sheer will and determination kept her moving. She dragged herself onto the soft, wet sand, collapsing onto the shore, too exhausted even to weep. The morning sun, now climbing higher, cast a gentle warmth upon her chilled skin, offering a silent promise of survival. After resting for a long period, allowing the peaceful warmth to seep back into her limbs, Budur managed to stand up. She surveyed her surroundings. The island was large, densely wooded, and completely deserted. There were no signs of human life, no villages, and no fishing boats. It was a place of deep, untouched solitude. The vastness of the sea stretched away behind her, reminding her of the tragic loss of the wise vizier. Yet she still held the prince's ring, cold and heavy, a constant reminder of her singular mission. She spent the entire day walking slowly along the coastline, her mind focused only on the necessary steps for survival. She found a small, secluded spring of fresh water, hidden among the rocks, which restored her strength. She gathered some wild fruits and berries that grew in the shade of the tall trees. As evening approached, she found a natural cave, dry and hidden from the wind, where she could seek shelter. She lay down on the soft sand inside the cave, falling into a deep, restorative sleep that was finally free from the emotional turmoil of the past year. The next morning, Budur woke with her resolve renewed. She knew she could not remain isolated on the desolate island. She climbed to the highest point she could find and scanned the vast, tranquil horizon. Just as she was about to despair, she saw a faint smudge of white in the distance, the sail of a passing vessel. With a sudden rush of energy, she ran down to the shore, tearing a large piece of cloth from her outer robe. She climbed the tallest rock she could reach and began waving the cloth frantically, hoping to catch the attention of the distant sailors. The ship was sailing quickly, and for a moment she feared they had passed her by. But then she saw the distant ship change its course slightly and begin moving toward the island. The vessel belonged to a wealthy and respected captain, a merchant who traded in precious silks and spices across the Great Isles. The sailors were astonished to find a solitary young man in humble, sodden robes waving frantically on the deserted shore. The captain approached Budur with gentle curiosity. "Who are you, young sir?" he asked in a calm, welcoming voice. "And how came you to be alone on this remote, empty island?" Budur, remembering the vizier's last instructions and clinging to her disguise, replied in the measured, quiet tone of her assumed persona, Gair. "I am Gair, the son of a wealthy merchant. We were struck by a terrible storm, and my father and all the crew were lost. I clung to a plank and was mercifully cast upon this shore. I beg of your kindness, take me to the nearest inhabited port, and I shall repay you richly when I contact my family. The captain, seeing the noble composure in the young man's eyes despite his humble dress, believed the tale of misfortune and was moved by pity. He immediately offered Budur comfort, providing her with fresh clothes, food, and a quiet, private cabin on his ship. Budur ensured that her disguise remained flawless, maintaining a quiet distance from the rest of the crew, speaking only when necessary, and always keeping the prince's ring hidden. The merchant vessel sailed for many more weeks, trading at various ports and harbors. Budur, observing the life of the sea and the activities of the merchants, learned much about the geography of the world and, more importantly, confirmed the correct route to the islands of Caladan. She was filled with a quiet, burning excitement. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of gentle sea travel, the captain announced their approach to a vast, magnificent island. "Young Geir," the captain said, his voice slow and proud, "we are approaching our final destination. We shall anchor in the great port of the Sultan of the Islands of Caladan. This is the wealthiest city in these." Budur's heart leaped with a sudden, powerful surge of hope and fear. She was finally here. She was in the city of Kamar al-Zaman, the city where her fate awaited her. She thanked the captain profoundly for his kindness, preparing herself mentally for the final, daunting step of her lonely journey. The massive merchant vessel finally anchored in the bustling, great port of the islands of Caladan. The city itself was a magnificent sight, rising from the tranquil sea, with tall white towers and domes that shone like pearls under the midday sun. The air was filled with the mixed scent of sea salt, exotic spices, and rare perfumes. Budur, disguised as the young merchant Geir, stepped onto the quay with a feeling of awe and quiet trepidation. She knew that her life's entire purpose now depended on the next few steps. She thanked the kind captain profoundly, promising to arrange for a rich reward once she contacted her supposed family. The captain, moved by her noble sorrow, simply wished her well and departed. Budur was left alone in the crowded, noisy marketplace, a solitary figure in humble robes amidst the chaotic wealth of the port. Her first task was to find the palace of the great Sultan Shahriman. She moved slowly through the narrow, winding streets, observing the faces of the people and the silent, imposing architecture. Her calm and distinguished bearing, even in the guise of a young merchant, drew quiet attention. She eventually reached the grand square leading to the royal palace, a structure of immense size and serene, imposing beauty. Budur knew she could not simply demand an audience. She needed a plan of quiet subtlety. She stopped at a nearby coffee house, a place filled with low murmurs and the soothing scent of coffee and tobacco. She engaged an old retired courtier in quiet conversation, speaking gently of her father's lost friendship with the Sultan. The old man was impressed by her composure and her soft, respectful manner. Through this conversation, she learned the current state of the Sultan's court, the deep sorrow of Sultan Shahriman, the return of Prince Kamar al-Zaman, and the prince's continued, quiet madness, how he remained confined, still wearing the magnificent pearl necklace, refusing to speak or eat, consumed by the longing for the owner of the missing ring. Hearing this confirmed every detail of the vizier's counsel and strengthened Budur's resolve. She finally found a way to secure a formal audience. She purchased a set of rare, beautiful foreign silks that her father supposedly intended as a gift for the Sultan. She then requested an audience with the chief vizier, presenting herself as a foreign merchant's son bearing a precious gift and a sad story. The chief vizier, a busy but humane man, granted her a brief audience. Budur entered the vizier's chamber with the silks, bowing deeply and respectfully. She presented the gift, then began her tale with a composed, sorrowful voice. She recounted the story of the storm, the loss of her father, and her rescue, all according to the vizier's original fabrication. Then she added the crucial true part of the story. A wise vizier, my father, before his death, told me a strange secret. He said he had met a great Jinn, who told him a tale of two royal children enchanted by love and a jewel swap. He warned my father that if he ever reached the court of Sultan Shahriman, he must show this one object. With great care, Budur withdrew the massive man's ring from her robe and placed it gently on the vizier's table. The ring shone under the lamplight, heavy and undeniably masculine. The vizier, who had been privy to the entire secret history of the prince's affliction and the lost ring, was instantly stunned. He recognized the jewel immediately. He gazed at the beautiful, pale young man, Gair, and realized he held the key to the prince's madness. The vizier instantly stood up, his mind racing. He knew this was the moment to act with courage and speed. He spoke to Budur in hushed, earnest tones. Young Gair, remain here in quiet solitude. You have brought hope to a despairing court. I shall present this ring to the Sultan immediately. Do not speak of this to anyone, and may God protect your silence. The vizier rushed immediately to the inner chambers, where Sultan Shahriman sat alone, consumed by the sadness of his son's incurable melancholy. The vizier knelt before the Sultan, presenting the ring on a cushion of soft velvet. "O my king, the cure has arrived. The ring that drove the prince to madness has been found." The Sultan, seeing the familiar ring, was utterly overwhelmed with emotion. Sultan Shahriman, seeing the familiar heavy ring resting on the velvet cushion, was instantly overwhelmed by a flood of profound emotion. He snatched the ring and held it tightly, his hands trembling with relief and disbelief. He questioned the chief vizier closely, demanding to know every single detail about the mysterious young man who called himself Gair and the story he recounted. The vizier repeated the tale of the storm, the lost father, and the Jinn's strange prophecy concerning the exchange of the jewels and the madness of the prince. The Sultan, now completely convinced that this young man held the key to his son's recovery, commanded the vizier to bring Gair to the inner chambers immediately. He ordered that Gair be treated not as a mere merchant's son, but with the honor due to a messenger of fate. Budur, still composed and maintaining her quiet male dignity, was led into the Sultan's presence. She bowed low, her heart beating rapidly. Sultan Shahriman gazed at her, this pale, beautiful young man, and saw a reflection of the same quiet melancholy that consumed his own son. He spoke to her with genuine tenderness, praising her courage and thanking her for bringing the powerful amulet back to his court. "O Gair," the Sultan said softly, "you have saved my son's life and his sanity. Now you must complete your merciful work. You must come with me and present this ring to the prince yourself. Perhaps your pure presence will break the final spell that binds him." Budur agreed instantly, her heart soaring with desperate hope to see Kamar al-Zaman again. She followed the Sultan to the secluded tower where the prince remained confined. The Sultan entered first, carrying the ring. Prince Kamar al-Zaman was sitting in quiet despair, Still wearing the pearl necklace, his gaze fixed sadly on the distant sea. He looked frail and consumed by his obsession. The Sultan approached him gently. "My son," he said, his voice full of a tender relief he had not felt in years. "Look, your ring has returned. Look upon the jewel that caused your sorrow." Kamar al-Zaman looked up slowly. His eyes immediately fell upon the ring. As he recognized the familiar curves of the gold and the unique carving, a sudden, powerful clarity washed over his features. The cloud of sorrow lifted instantly, replaced by a radiant joy. He snatched the ring from his father's hand, placed it back on his finger, and for the first time in a year, he smiled, a beautiful, dazzling smile that restored his magnificent presence completely. The madness was gone. The Sultan wept tears of profound happiness and embraced his son tightly. He then brought Budur forward. "Behold my son," the Sultan announced. "This is the noble young merchant, Gair, who brought the ring back to us. Reward him richly, for he is the messenger of your fate." Kamar al-Zaman turned to the young man. He saw a youth of gentle bearing, pale features, and quiet composure. He recognized the profound, beautiful sadness in Gair's eyes. Unbeknownst to the prince, he was gazing at the exact face that had haunted his dreams, the face he had shared a magical, sleeping moment with. The prince spoke with gratitude. "Oh, Gair, I owe you my life and my sanity. Ask whatever you wish, and I shall grant it immediately, for you have freed me from a dark prison." Budur, maintaining her male role perfectly, replied with quiet grace. "O noble prince, I ask for nothing but your continued peace. However, my father, now lost at sea, was a man of great learning. Perhaps I could serve your royal court as a humble servant, managing your correspondence or assisting your viziers, until I can establish my own life." Sultan Shahriman, deeply impressed by Gair's humility and intelligence, immediately agreed. He appointed Gair to the highest position of trust, making him the prince's closest personal companion and secretary. Thus, the Princess Budur found herself installed in the very palace of the man she loved, serving him daily, attending to his needs, and sleeping in a room immediately adjacent to his own. The irony of their proximity, after a year of forced, hateful distance, was a twist of fate that only the Jinn could have truly appreciated. The two remained inseparable, bound by the secrets of the sea and the shared memory of a lost jewel. Budur, however, knew that she could not maintain her disguise forever. The challenge of revealing her true self and the pearl necklace she still possessed lay waiting. The Princess Budur, in her quiet and effective disguise as Gair, settled into her new role at the court of the islands of Caledon. She was an instant success. Her inherited noble composure, combined with the quick wit she gained from her royal education, made her an invaluable and indispensable companion to Prince Kamar al-Zaman. The prince, now restored to his former tranquility and brilliance, found in Gair the perfect partner for his studies and reflections. The two young royals spent their days inseparably. They rode out in the cool mornings to the quiet, serene palace gardens, discussing the affairs of the kingdom and the deeper philosophies of the ancient world. They spent long afternoons together in the cool marble libraries, poring over ancient texts and maps. Budur, speaking with the measured wisdom of her assumed male persona, was able to share her true thoughts and intelligence with the prince in a way she never could have as a sequestered princess. Prince Kamar al-Zaman, completely cured of his obsession with a missing ring, was filled with deep affection for his new companion. He felt a profound sense of connection to Geir, a bond that transcended mere friendship or servitude. He often spoke to Geir of the deep, lingering mystery of his marriage, how he had traveled across the sea only to be cursed by his bride, whom he still remembered with a mixture of anger and confusion. Budur listened patiently to these accounts, her heart quietly swelling with emotion. She had to use all her composure to maintain her disguise, nodding solemnly as the prince described the wicked thief who wore his ring and the curse of the pearl necklace. The necklace itself, still in her possession, was hidden securely within the folds of her simple robes, a silent secret that she carried day and night. Sultan Shahriman observed the close relationship between his son and Geir with immense satisfaction. He was profoundly grateful that the young merchant had brought such peace and purpose back to the prince's life. He showered Geir with gifts and honors, completely unaware that he was hosting the long-lost princess of China, his son's true, though estranged, wife. The entire court assumed that Geir was merely a young man of extraordinary talent and rare, quiet humility. Budur, despite the comfort of her situation, knew her deception could not last forever. Living in such close proximity to Kamar al-Zaman, sharing every waking moment with the man she loved, began to weigh heavily on her heart. She longed to reveal her true identity, to shed the heavy weight of the disguise, and to claim her rightful place as his wife. The physical and emotional strain of maintaining the pretense of being a man, hiding her true nature, and suppressing her deepening love grew more intense each day. She realized that the time for subtlety was nearing its end. The prince had been fully restored to sanity, and the time had come to break the final enchantment, the enchantment of mistaken identity. She needed to arrange a moment of quiet, private revelation. However, she was cautious, fearing that if she revealed herself too abruptly, the shock might drive the prince back into the melancholy from which he had just been rescued. She began to plan her final, quiet move, seeking to reintroduce the idea of the jewels and the magical night with greater caution and tenderness. Her plan was to guide the prince's mind gently back to the memory of the Jinn and the mysterious woman who had once lain beside him, leading him to discover the profound truth that had been hidden beneath his own roof for so many months. She understood that their destiny was not only to be together, but to understand the nature of the magic that had brought them together and torn them apart. Budur, disguised as Geir, began to implement her quiet, cautious plan to unveil the truth. Her goal was to guide Prince Kamar al-Zaman toward the realization that the past sorrow and the present comfort were inextricably linked. She knew the revelation must come from his own recognition, not from a simple, shocking announcement. One quiet afternoon, as they sat together in the palace library, surrounded by the comforting scent of old parchment, Kamar al-Zaman spoke again of the strange, beautiful face that had briefly haunted his dreams during his long confinement. He spoke of the confusion of his wedding night and his irrational anger toward the Princess Budur. Budur seized the moment gently. "O Prince," she said, her voice soft and contemplative, "you spoke of a magnificent pearl necklace, the jewel that replaced your ring. Do you still possess this object of sorrow, or did you discard it when your ring was restored?" The prince paused, thoughtfully stroking his chin. "It is strange, Geir. Though the madness left me, I kept the necklace. It felt important, almost like a piece of the puzzle, even after the jewel itself ceased to torment me. It is locked away safely in my inner chest. Why do you ask of it now?" "It is merely curiosity, O Prince," Budur replied calmly, maintaining her poker face. "As a merchant's son, I appreciate the craftsmanship of foreign jewels. Perhaps, if it is not too much trouble, you might show it to me one day. It might hold some secret inscription or sign that relates to its origins, and thus perhaps to the mysterious night of the Jinn. Kamar al-Zaman readily agreed, pleased by Gayer's scholarly curiosity. The next day, he brought the pearl necklace, a large, heavy strand of glistening white stones, and laid it upon a table between them. Budur had to suppress a powerful emotional reaction. Seeing her own necklace again, after so long, was a poignant moment. She leaned in, pretending to examine the pearls closely. "Indeed, O Prince," she murmured, her voice filled with feigned admiration. "This is a jewel of unparalleled beauty and great antiquity. Tell me, when you look upon this necklace, does it not conjure any memory? Not of anger, but perhaps of the place where it came from." Kamar al-Zaman gazed at the necklace, a faint flicker of recognition passing through his eyes, though he couldn't grasp it. "It reminds me only of the darkness of my tower and the rage I felt at its mysterious appearance," he admitted sadly. "But the memory of the beautiful, dark-haired woman who wore it remains utterly lost to me." Budur realized the magical enchantment was deeply rooted, separating the visual memory of the woman from the object itself. She needed a more direct approach, one that involved a mirror image. Later that week, she suggested a new form of entertainment for the prince. "O Prince, your royal duties weigh heavily. Perhaps we should engage in a quiet game of chess or cards to refresh your mind." Kamar al-Zaman, finding this idea agreeable, settled down with Budur for a game of chess in his private chamber. As they played, Budur took the prince's massive ring from his finger, under the pretense of examining its intricate carving once more. She then, very subtly and calmly, slipped it onto her own finger, the exact finger on which it had rested on the wedding night. She continued the game, ensuring her hand rested openly upon the tabletop. Kamar al-Zaman looked at his companion's hand, his eyes scanning the chess pieces. Suddenly, his gaze fell upon the ring on Gayer's finger. The sight of the ring, which he had just been wearing, suddenly transferred to the hand of his closest friend, triggered a deep, powerful alarm in his mind. He paused the game abruptly. "Gayer," he asked, his voice slow and tight with a sudden, confusing anxiety, "why are you wearing my ring? Do you also wish to tempt fate and suffer the same madness that afflicted me? Take it off immediately." Budur replied calmly, "I apologize, Prince. I merely wish to see how it looked on a hand of a commoner, compared to that of a prince. But tell me, O Prince, when you look at my hand and this ring, does it remind you of anything? Anything at all?" Kamar al-Zaman stared at the ring on Gayer's pale hand, and then a series of disjointed images flashed through his mind. The veiled woman, the wedding chamber, the accusations, the terrible night. His memory was beginning to stir, but the truth remained hidden behind a wall of magical confusion. He simply shook his head, his confusion deepening, but his anger was gone, replaced by a profound, restless curiosity about the true identity of his noble friend. Budur knew the time for the full revelation had finally arrived. The tension between Prince Kamar al-Zaman and his companion, Gayer, became palpable. The prince was deeply unsettled by the sight of his own ancestral ring on Gayer's hand. The subtle suggestion made by the young merchant had finally pierced the enchantment surrounding the prince's memory, stirring deep, chaotic waves of recognition and confusion within him. He felt as if a veil was slowly being lifted from his mind, revealing only fragmented glimpses of a beautiful, shadowed past. That evening, Kamar al-Zaman could not sleep. He paced his chamber, his thoughts revolving around the gentle face of Gayer and the sudden, irrational anger he had felt toward the Princess Budur on their wedding night. He was utterly perplexed, unable to reconcile the kind, noble companion who brought him peace with the thief he had so fiercely despised. Budur, watching him from her adjacent chamber, knew the time for hesitation was over. She understood that delaying the truth would only lead to further confusion and perhaps renew his melancholy. She prayed silently for courage and for the prince's peace of mind. She approached his chamber and knocked softly. Kamar al-Zaman welcomed her immediately. His face was etched with sleepless worry. "Gayer," he said, his voice low and serious, "I need your counsel. That ring, it has disturbed my mind profoundly. I feel as though I am standing on the precipice of a terrible memory, yet I cannot step across." Budur sat down calmly, meeting his gaze with a look of deep, shared understanding. "O Prince," she began, her voice measured and slow, "I have something to confess to you, a secret I have guarded out of love for your peace. But now only the truth can heal the final wound." She paused, taking a slow, calming breath. She reached inside the folds of her robe, where the magnificent pearl necklace had been hidden for months. Slowly, reverently, she withdrew the necklace and laid it upon the prince's marble table, next to his lamp. The pearls shone with a soft, cool luster, filling the quiet chamber with their luminous glow. "O Prince," she continued, her voice now barely a whisper, filled with a gentle, feminine cadence that Kamar al-Zaman had never heard before from Gayer. "You remember this jewel as the mark of your curse. You remember it as the object of theft. Now look closely upon it, and look upon the hand that holds your ring." Kamar al-Zaman stared first at the familiar, magnificent necklace, and then his eyes drifted down to the large, masculine ring resting on Gayer's small, pale finger. He looked from the pearls to the ring, and back again. The images in his mind, the Jinn, the magical flight, the silent argument, the beautiful, angry woman, finally coalesced with the reality before him. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a sudden, powerful clarity. He recognized the truth, not merely through logic, but through the deep, hidden connection of their souls. He realized the quiet, gentle companion who had saved him was, in fact, the courageous woman who had fled her kingdom to find him. His eyes widened in astonishment, then filled with overwhelming joy. He looked closely at Gayer's face, searching beyond the simple robe and the turban, and saw the delicate majesty of his beloved Princess Budur. "Budur!" he exclaimed, his voice husky with emotion. "It is you. It was always you. By the grace of the heavens, the Jinn did not curse us, but bound us in a manner too subtle for our human minds." Budur, finally shedding the heavy weight of her disguise, allowed herself a small, serene smile. She removed the heavy turban, allowing her long, magnificent black hair to cascade down her back, instantly transforming her from the quiet merchant Gayer to the radiant Princess Budur. The final enchantment was broken. Kamar al-Zaman rushed to her side, falling to his knees, his heart overflowing with a mixture of profound regret for his anger and boundless joy for her presence. They sat together in a quiet chamber, and Budur recounted the entire story. The escape from her father's court, the loss of the vizier in a terrifying storm, her survival on the deserted island, and her arrival at his court as Gayer. Kamar al-Zaman listened with awe, his love for his brave, intelligent wife soaring to impossible heights. He realized the true depth of her courage and sacrifice. They embraced with a tenderness that sealed their true union, a union built on destiny, magic, and quiet, enduring strength. The long, lonely night of enchantment was finally over. The secret was now shared, and the quiet chamber of Prince Kamar al-Zaman held a profound serenity that night. The prince and princess sat together, speaking softly until the morning light filtered through the high windows. The anger, the suspicion, and the years of solitary longing had vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, calm joy born of destiny and shared hardship. The prince, gazing at his radiant, courageous wife, finally understood the true meaning of the pearl necklace and the ring. They were not objects of theft, but tokens of a bond forged by the Jinn and sealed by the bravery of Budur. They decided that the time had come to reveal the entire miraculous story to Sultan Shahriman. As the sun climbed higher, Sultan Shahriman, having heard no unusual noise from the prince's chamber, sent an attendant to fetch Gayer, his son's trusted secretary. The attendant returned quickly, his face a picture of stunned astonishment, reporting that Gayer was not to be found, but that a woman of immense regal beauty was seated next to the prince. Sultan Shahriman, deeply perplexed, rushed to his son's chamber. He found Kamar al-Zaman sitting beside a lady whose splendor surpassed anything he had ever witnessed. She was wearing the massive pearl necklace, and the prince's ring rested firmly on her finger. The sultan, barely finding his voice, spoke with confusion. "My son, what is the meaning of this? Where is Gayer? And who is this queen who now graces your chamber?" Prince Kamar al-Zaman rose, his face shining with happiness and conviction. He led Budur forward. "Oh, my noble father," he announced, his voice strong and clear. "Behold the truth. Gayer is no more, for Gayer was merely the humble disguise of your daughter-in-law, Princess Budur of China. This is the queen who wore the necklace, and this is the owner of my heart and the bearer of my ring." The prince then recounted the entire tale to his astonished father, the magical exchange by the Jinn, the failed wedding night, Budur's escape and journey across the sea disguised as a merchant, the loss of the vizier, her arrival at the court, and the subtle, clever plan she executed to return the ring and break the final spell. He spoke with such passion and clarity that the Sultan could not doubt the truth. Sultan Shahriman listened with mounting awe and profound gratitude. He realized the incredible bravery, intelligence, and unwavering loyalty of his daughter-in-law. Tears welled in his eyes as he embraced Budur warmly, apologizing deeply for the shame and suffering his stubbornness and misunderstanding had caused her. He showered her with immediate praise, declaring her to be the wisest and most courageous princess in all the kingdoms. The Sultan immediately ordered the entire court to be assembled. He publicly recounted the miraculous, enchanted story of the two star-crossed lovers and the subtle working of fate. He announced the true, successful union of Prince Kamar al-Zaman and Princess Budur, emphasizing the princess's heroic journey and her mastery of disguise. The news spread through the capital like a gentle wave, inspiring joy and wonder throughout the kingdom. The kingdom erupted in widespread, tranquil celebration. The true royal wedding was prepared, not in shame and haste, but in profound joy and reverence for the miracle that had occurred. For an entire month, the cities and towns of the islands of Caladan were decorated with silks and gentle, colored lanterns. The days were filled with quiet music, and the evenings with soft poetry recited under the clear night sky. Finally, the grand marriage celebration took place. It was a ceremony of profound beauty and serenity, marking not just a political alliance, but the triumph of true love over powerful magic and human error. Prince Kamar al-Zaman and Princess Budur, finally united without doubt or deception, shared a deep, eternal gaze, recognizing in each other the reflection of their shared destiny. The long, lonely journey of the two lovers was finally complete, and they settled into a period of deep, shared tranquility, ready to face the quiet responsibilities of their future reign. The memory of the Jinn's jest was now a shared, beautiful secret, binding them together forever. The magnificent celebrations concluded, and Prince Kamar al-Zaman and Princess Budur began their life together in the utmost happiness and profound tranquility. The court was settled and peaceful. The Sultan Shahriman ruled with wisdom, and the young couple spent their days in quiet companionship, devoted equally to the welfare of the kingdom and their shared intellectual pursuits. Their love was a source of great serenity for the entire palace. After a few years of this profound peace, Princess Budur gave birth to two children, a son whom they named Umjud and a daughter whom they named Azad. The joy of the Sultan was immense. He saw in his grandchildren the promise of a peaceful, prosperous future. The naming ceremony was celebrated with grand, calm feasts, and the children grew up under the soft, loving gaze of their royal parents. However, Sultan Shahriman was growing old, and he knew his time to abdicate was near. He prepared to pass the full responsibilities of the throne to his son, Kamar al-Zaman. Before the formal ceremony of ascension, the Sultan called his son and daughter-in-law to his private chamber. "My beloved children," the Sultan said softly, his voice gentle and slow, "I must now prepare to relinquish the cares of this world. But there remains one final duty you must perform before you fully ascend the throne. You must travel to the kingdom of King Gair, your father and my respected ally, and inform him personally of the wonderful news of your reconciliation and the birth of your children. He has lived under the burden of great sorrow, believing his daughter was lost or still gravely ill. You must restore his peace." Prince Kamar al-Zaman and Princess Budur agreed immediately. They recognized the deep respect owed to King Gair and understood the sorrow their continued silence must cause him. The prince decided to embark on the journey swiftly. Sultan Shahriman arranged for a magnificent fleet to be prepared, laden with the most precious gifts for King Gair, gifts of rare jewels, fine silks, and detailed scrolls recounting the entire magical story of the Jinn and the exchange of the jewels. The prince and princess prepared for a long sea voyage, taking their two young children, Umjud and Azad, with them, along with a minimal retinue of trusted servants. The farewell was emotional but serene. The old sultan embraced them, giving them his final gentle blessings for their journey and their reign. The fleet set sail on a calm, bright morning. The voyage began in tranquility. The sea was flat and still, the skies were clear, and the ships moved smoothly, carried by soft, predictable winds. The prince and princess spent their days on the deck, enjoying the fresh air and the peaceful view, watching their children play happily. Budur recounted more details of her daring journey as Gair, and Kamar al-Zaman listened with unending admiration. After a long period of serene sailing, the fleet came to a small, beautiful wooded island, entirely uninhabited. The prince decided to pause the voyage here for a few days to allow the children and the servants to rest from the monotony of the sea. The island was a paradise of quiet solitude. The air was fragrant with the scent of wild flowers, and gentle streams flowed over smooth, moss-covered stones. They set up a magnificent, comfortable camp beneath the shade of ancient, sprawling trees. One evening, as the moon cast a quiet light upon the camp, Kamar al-Zaman found his wife gazing pensively at the sea. She seemed troubled by a quiet memory. "My queen," he asked softly, taking her hand, "what sorrow weighs upon your heart?" "The peace of this island should lift your spirits," Budur replied. "O prince, this island is beautiful, but it reminds me of the desolate shore where I landed after the storm that claimed the life of the kind vizier. That memory still troubles my peace. Let us not linger here for too long." The prince, deeply compassionate, agreed to sail on the following morning. But as the night deepened and the camp settled into a deep, peaceful sleep, a new and powerful magical force began to stir in the shadows of the island. The second great trial of Kamar, al-Zaman, and Budur was about to begin, an encounter far more perilous than the first playful jest of the Jinn. The royal camp settled into a deep, peaceful slumber beneath the ancient trees of the uninhabited island. The night was still, broken only by the gentle sound of the nearby sea and the soft breathing of the sleeping family. Prince Kamar al-Zaman slept soundly, his arm resting lightly beside his wife, Princess Budur. He was finally at peace, his heart cured of its former melancholy. However, the tranquility of the island was merely a deceptive facade. High above, in the cool, immense expanse of the night sky, a powerful, solitary being was flying, a female Jinn named Maimunah, who ruled a distant, hidden domain of the sea. Maimunah was known among the Jinn for her fierce pride and her obsession with beauty. As she flew over the island, she sensed the powerful aura of the two sleeping royals, a light far brighter than any ordinary human presence. She descended swiftly, gliding silently through the leaves, until she stood at the edge of the royal camp. Her eyes, which glowed with a pale, cold light, first fell upon the sleeping Prince Kamar al-Zaman. His magnificent features, restored by years of peace and happiness, were truly breathtaking. Maimunah paused, momentarily stunned by his flawless, masculine beauty. A sudden fierce desire to possess him, to make him her consort in her silent underwater kingdom, swept over her. But then her gaze shifted to the Princess Budur, who lay sleeping beside the prince. Budur's beauty was of a different, more profound nature, serene, majestic, and utterly perfect in its feminine form. Maimunah remembered the ancient, playful contest between Maimunah and Danhasch, who had debated the superiority of these two rival beauties. Maimunah, known for her superior judgment, immediately conceded that Princess Budur was the more dazzling vision. A violent, consuming wave of jealousy and possessiveness surged through the heart of the powerful Jinn. How dare these two humans possess such tranquility and such unique beauty, while she, a mighty ruler, was left to wander the empty skies alone? Their happiness became an intolerable offense to her pride. She decided instantly that she could not abduct the prince, for his beauty would only remind her of the superior loveliness of his wife. Instead, she resolved to cause a catastrophe that would shatter their peace forever and claim the princess for her own court. Maimunah, moving with an impossible swiftness that defied the very air, wrapped a fine, cool thread of magic around the sleeping Budur and her two children, Amjad and Azad. She lifted them gently, silently, without disturbing the prince's peaceful rest, and ascended back into the sky. The great Jinn flew for hours across the tranquil sea until she reached the shores of her own isolated, magical kingdom, a place hidden beneath the deep currents of the sea. She deposited the sleeping princess and the children in a magnificent, secluded palace made entirely of smooth, luminous coral. Before departing, she placed a silent, unbreakable charm over the chamber, ensuring that Budur could not leave, and that Kamar al-Zaman could not track them using any earthly magic or means. Maimunah then flew back to the uninhabited island. Standing over the still sleeping prince, she took out a small piece of dark, polished stone and carved a terrifying, cryptic message upon it. She placed the stone on Kamar al-Zaman's chest and vanished entirely as the first faint hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Prince Kamar al-Zaman awoke to the sudden, unsettling silence of the camp. His hand reached out instinctively, finding only the cold, empty silk of the pillow where his wife had rested. He sat up in a sudden panic, his eyes scanning the space. Budur was gone. His children were gone. The servants, who were still sleeping soundly, had witnessed nothing. Then his gaze fell upon the dark, ominous stone resting on his chest. He picked it up, his hands trembling with a sudden returning terror, the same cold fear he had felt in his lonely tower years ago. He read the cryptic inscription carved into the dark surface. "The princess is mine. Seek her not across the land, for she has gone to a place beyond the knowledge of mortals. She will be the queen of the sea, and you will never again taste the peace of her presence. Look for her only in the light of the sun and the stillness of the moon, for I have taken her into the deep." The prince read the message once, and then again. His heart, which had been so calmly content, was instantly plunged into the depths of a dark, cold despair far greater than his initial madness. The joy of his life, his brave, magnificent Budur, had been snatched away by a cruel, powerful entity. He now realized that the new trial was not a jest of the Jinn, but a fierce, devastating act of eternal separation. He screamed his wife's name, his voice raw with sudden, unbearable agony, shattering the profound silence of the deserted island. The long, tranquil years of happiness were over, and the prince was once again completely alone in the world. Prince Kamar al-Zaman's anguished scream shattered the serene silence of the deserted island. The raw sound of pure, sudden agony instantly woke the sleeping royal retinue. Servants and soldiers rushed frantically to the prince's magnificent tent, their faces pale with alarm, unsure whether they faced a beast or a hidden assassin. They found the prince sitting alone, clutching a dark carved stone to his chest, his eyes glazed with terror and despair. His royal robes were disheveled, and his noble composure had been completely destroyed. He pointed a trembling hand to the empty space where the Princess Budur and the children had been sleeping. "Gone," he cried out, his voice a broken, ravaged whisper. "They are gone. The Jinn has returned. She has taken my queen and my children to the deep of the sea. Look at the message of despair." The chief attendant, kneeling beside the prince, gently took the dark, cold stone and read the terrifying, cryptic inscription aloud to the assembled, horrified retinue. The words, declaring Budur the queen of the sea and commanding the prince never to seek her, sent a wave of silent, paralyzing fear through the entire camp. The servants instantly realized that this calamity was not a human attack, but a powerful, malicious act of supernatural fate. Kamar al-Zaman, now fully aware of the overwhelming power of his enemy, sank into a profound state of sorrow far deeper and colder than his initial lovesickness. He realized the cruel, terrifying irony. The Jinn had first brought them together, and now a far more powerful Jinn had torn them apart forever. The tranquility he had achieved had been nothing but a brief, fragile illusion. The prince's faithful retinue immediately began a desperate, futile search. They scour the entire uninhabited island, searching every cave, every dense thicket of trees, and every inch of the quiet shore, knowing in their hearts that no earthly prison could contain the power of a Jinn of the sea. They searched until the sun reached its highest point, then again until the shadows lengthened into evening, but found nothing. No trace, no footprint, not a single disturbed leaf, only the cold, ominous silence of the dark stone. The chief attendant approached the broken prince, who sat motionless on the sand, gazing mournfully at the sea where his love had vanished. "Oh, my noble prince," the attendant said, his voice thick with compassion. "We must not linger here. This is a place of magic and despair, and the Jinn's power is absolute. We must set sail immediately, return to your father, Sultan Shahriman, and seek his wisdom and counsel. Only his ancient knowledge and vast resources may offer a sliver of hope against this dark fate." Kamar al-Zaman, though tempted to remain on the shore and starve himself into oblivion, finally nodded in sorrowful agreement. The desire to see his father, to share the burden of this unimaginable tragedy, was the only remaining tether to his life. He knew that the Jinn had commanded him not to search, but he refused to obey. He would seek counsel, and he would seek justice, even if it led to his own complete destruction. The magnificent fleet, which had sailed from Caladan with such high hopes and joy, now sailed back with a funereal slowness, carrying only the weight of despair. The banners were lowered, and a chilling silence replaced the songs and laughter of the peaceful voyage. Kamar al-Zaman remained on the deck for the entire sorrowful journey, staring blankly at the dark, vast expanse of the ocean. He held the ominous stone in one hand and the ring, the symbol of his true love, on the other. He reflected on the terrible journey of his life. First, a prisoner of his own pride, then a prisoner of a magical madness, then briefly a captive of profound happiness, and now a victim of eternal, unchosen separation. He knew that the tranquility he had found with Budur was the most precious thing he had ever possessed, and that the loss of his children and his wife was a wound that could never truly heal. When the ships finally reached the port of Caladan, the sight of the city's festive, unburdened tranquility only deepened the prince's pain. He was a ghost returning to a life that no longer belonged to him. He stepped off the ship with the slow, heavy gait of a man already buried. He knew the tale he had to tell his father would shatter the old sultan's peace forever, forcing him to confront a loss far greater than the prince's earlier, temporary madness. The time for quiet counsel was over. The time for action, however hopeless, had begun. The sorrowful return of the fleet did not go unnoticed in the bustling port of the islands of Caladan. The lack of banners, the silent ships, and the grave demeanor of the retinue quickly alerted the Sultan's court that a deep misfortune had occurred. Word was swiftly sent to Sultan Shahriman, who was waiting in the palace with serene anticipation for the joyful news of their successful voyage and the meeting with King Gaer. When the old Sultan heard the reports that the ships were back, but the Princess Budur and the grandchildren were absent, a cold fear gripped his heart. He rushed immediately to the port, his royal composure shattered by a terrible premonition. He found his son, Prince Kamar al-Zaman, standing on the quay, looking like a shade of his former self. The prince's face was etched with unspeakable sorrow, his eyes hollow, and his body bowed under the weight of his new agony. The Sultan embraced his son, weeping openly, and led him in solemn silence back to the inner chambers of the palace. There, in the privacy of the royal hall, Kamar al-Zaman recounted the entire catastrophic event. He described the tranquil stop on the deserted island, the deep sleep, the sudden, terrifying awakening, and the crushing silence where his wife and children had been. He then presented the dark, ominous stone, reading the Jinn's cruel, cryptic message aloud to his father. Sultan Shahriman listened to the tale with mounting horror and despair. He recognized the terrible power of the Jinn's malice, a power far beyond any human kingdom's ability to resist. The initial joy over his son's cure and marriage was instantly crushed by the magnitude of this second, irreversible loss. He mourned the magnificent Princess Budur and his two young grandchildren, Amjad and Azad, whose lives had been snatched away into the eternal depths of the sea. The Sultan, a man of deep faith and wisdom, spoke with a voice heavy with sorrow. "My son," he said, his eyes filled with tears, "this is a trial from the heavens, a destiny we cannot avoid. The Jinn that has taken your wife is clearly of immense power, and her command is absolute. We cannot launch a fleet against the boundless sea, nor can we send armies to fight a being of air and magic. Her warning not to search is a truth born of her immense strength." Kamar al-Zaman, however, was filled not with acceptance, but with a burning, fierce refusal to surrender. "Oh, my father," he cried, falling to his knees, "I cannot accept this cruel fate. I cannot live without Budur. She is the soul of my being, the cure for my madness, and the mother of my children. I would rather die searching for her in the depths of the ocean than remain here, a king without a queen, a father without his heirs. I must seek her, even if the search leads to my destruction." The Sultan tried desperately to reason with him, reminding him of his duty to the kingdom and his loyalty to the people who depended on his reign. But Kamar al-Zaman's determination was absolute. His love for Budur transcended all duties, all fear, and all reason. Seeing his son's unyielding spirit and knowing that resistance would only cause him to waste away, the wise Sultan made a painful decision. He granted Kamar al-Zaman permission to leave the kingdom, but only on the condition that he would not travel as a prince, but as a humble, solitary wanderer. The Sultan knew that only freedom to search, however hopeless, could keep his son alive. Sultan Shahriman immediately summoned his viziers and his most trusted counselors. He declared that Prince Kamar al-Zaman was embarking on a long, secret pilgrimage for the health of his soul, and that the affairs of the kingdom would remain under the Sultan's direct care. Kamar al-Zaman, stripped of his royal robes, put on the simple, coarse garments of a dervish, a lone pilgrim seeking truth. He took only a small pouch of gold coins, a sharp dagger for protection, and the two most powerful relics of his love, the ring, which symbolized their magical union, and the Jinn's dark stone, which symbolized his eternal loss. He bade his father a tender, sorrowful farewell. The Sultan embraced him one last time, weeping, knowing that he might never see his magnificent son again. With the silence of a ghost, Kamar al-Zaman left the palace and the city that had once been the source of his profound happiness. He set off toward the port, driven by a single, desperate, and powerful purpose: to find the Queen of the Sea or to die in the attempt. His new, long journey of solitary penance and endless searching had just begun. Prince Kamar al-Zaman, now disguised as a solitary dervish, left the tranquility of his city and embarked upon his lonely, desperate quest. He sailed on the first available merchant ship heading west, leaving behind the immense wealth and power of his kingdom. His royal heart was replaced by the solitary determination of a seeker, driven only by the memory of Budur's face and the cold weight of the Jinn stone. His journey was long, arduous, and characterized by profound silence. He sailed from port to port, traveling across vast and different seas, sometimes as a passenger, sometimes as a humble laborer, seeking any whisper, any myth, or any legend that might guide him to the Queen of the Sea. He questioned old fishermen, spoke with solemn sailors, and consulted with hermits and wise men in every remote land he visited. The prince found that the Jinn's power had indeed ensured that his search was fruitless. No one had ever heard of a magical queen of the sea named Maimunah, nor did any map chart a hidden kingdom of luminous coral. The world was large and indifferent, and his pain was his own private burden. He was constantly met with silence or empty, fanciful tales that led nowhere. As months turned into a year, the initial fervor of Kamar al-Zaman's hope began to fade, replaced by a deep, weary melancholy. He had traversed countless leagues, seen innumerable cities, and faced countless dangers, but the trail to his beloved wife remained completely cold. His meager supply of gold coins was dwindling, and the simple life of a wandering dervish without the comfort of his royal status was taking a toll on his body and spirit. Yet he refused to abandon his search. The image of Budur and the thought of his lost children remained the only purpose of his existence. One day, while traveling inland through a dense, quiet forest far from the sea, his path crossed that of another solitary traveler, a man of advanced age, dressed in humble, worn robes, carrying a simple staff and a small satchel. This man, who was a venerable, scholarly hermit renowned for his knowledge of ancient lore, approached Kamar al-Zaman with a kind, gentle look in his eyes. The hermit, observing the prince's noble bearing despite his rough clothing and the profound, silent sorrow in his eyes, sensed that this was no ordinary pilgrim. He greeted the prince with unusual reverence. "Peace be upon you, young seeker," the old man said, his voice soft and slow like the rustling of dry leaves. "You carry a burden of immense sorrow, and your heart yearns for a place that is beyond the known routes of the earth. Tell me, what great quest drives you to such weariness?" Kamar al-Zaman, touched by the hermit's immediate perception of his pain, finally opened his heart. He recounted the entire incredible story, the magical union, the separation, Budur's heroism as Geir, their brief happiness, and the final, devastating act of abduction by the Jinn of the sea, showing the hermit the dark stone as proof. The old hermit listened with profound attention, his eyes wide with awe. When the prince finished, the hermit remained silent for a long time, contemplating the strange power of the Jinn. Finally, the hermit spoke, his voice filled with a new seriousness. "O prince, your story is one for the ages, and your quest is one of impossible difficulty. You seek Maimunah, the mighty Jinn, and her hidden kingdom. I have spent my life studying the signs and the deep lore of the spirits. I may not lead you to her, but I can guide your path." The hermit then revealed a powerful secret truth. The only place where a being of air and sea might be vulnerable to human intervention is in the Isles of the Mist, a chain of remote, storm-swept islands known for harboring both powerful magic and ancient, isolated human settlements. You must seek the oldest temple there, and find a way to consult the Sultan of the Air, a friendly spirit who controls the winds and the currents. He may possess the knowledge to find the sea-deep kingdom of Maimunah. The hermit gave Kamar al-Zaman detailed, precise instructions on how to reach the treacherous Isles of the Mist, the journey few humans ever survived. He then gave the prince a small, exquisitely carved talisman made of smooth, polished amber, instructing him to use it only in the moment of greatest need. Kamar al-Zaman thanked the kind hermit deeply, his hope rekindled by this new, concrete direction. He bid farewell to the old man and turned his weary steps back toward the tumultuous sea, filled with renewed determination to face the impossible journey ahead. Prince Kamar al-Zaman, his hope rekindled by the solemn counsel of the hermit, turned his back on the familiar lands and sought the treacherous sea routes leading toward the mythical Isles of the Mist. The hermit's words had given his desolate search a new, concrete purpose, replacing aimless wandering with focused, dangerous travel. He managed to secure passage on a small, weather-beaten fishing vessel whose crew were known for their daring and indifference to the usual routes. The journey to the Isles of the Mist was perilous and long. The waters became increasingly turbulent, shrouded in thick, perpetual fog that swallowed the sunlight and made navigation a desperate act of faith. The air was cold, damp, and heavy with an ancient, unsettling silence. The captain and crew, hardy men used to danger, were nonetheless wary of these waters, speaking in hushed tones of ancient shipwrecks and the strange, unseen forces that govern the mists. Kamar al-Zaman, however, felt no fear. His heart was already a wasteland of sorrow, and he welcomed the danger, seeing it as a necessary penance for his long-lost happiness. He spent his days on the deck, dressed in his simple dervish robes, gazing into the swirling gray fog, clutching the small amber talisman given by the hermit. After many weeks of terrifying travel, navigating by the unreliable sounds of the sea and brief, startling appearances of the distant sun, they finally reached the edge of the archipelago. The Isles of the Mist were forbidding, craggy, black mountains rising sharply from the churning water, their peaks eternally hidden by the gray clouds. The small, isolated settlements clung precariously to the rocky shores, inhabited by fishermen and hermits who rarely ventured into the outside world. Kamar al-Zaman paid the captain his passage fee and stepped onto the damp, slick stones of the shore. He bid the captain farewell, knowing he would likely never see a familiar face or a normal port again. He was truly alone in the heart of the magical, forgotten world. Following the precise instructions of the hermit, the prince began his ascent toward the tallest peak of the largest island. The climb was brutal. The fog was so thick that he could barely see his own hands, and the path was slick with moss and eternal dampness. He walked for days, subsisting on the meager provisions he carried and the small springs of cold water he found along the path. His royal upbringing was no match for this wild terrain, and he relied solely on his inner resolve and the constant burning memory of Budur. Finally, after a final arduous climb, he reached a clearing near the summit. There, hidden within a natural amphitheater of towering black stone, stood the temple the hermit had described. It was a structure of immense antiquity, built from stones that seemed to predate humanity, covered in moss and silent reverence. The entrance was a single, dark, imposing archway that seemed to lead into the very heart of the mountain. Kamar al-Zaman approached the temple with a heart filled with awe and trepidation. He knew this was the domain of the Sultan of the Air, a spirit of immense power, and that his humble request for guidance might be seen as an impertinence. He entered the archway and found himself in a vast, cold hall, lit only by a faint, otherworldly glow that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. In the center of the hall, seated upon a throne carved from a single block of polished black quartz, sat the Sultan of the Air. He was not a creature of flesh, but a being composed of swirling, pale light and thin, translucent smoke, constantly shifting and reforming. His form was grand and majestic, and his presence filled the hall with the deep, silent force of the controlling winds. Kamar al-Zaman knelt immediately, his heart pounding in his chest. He explained his story simply, without pleading, recounting the loss of his wife and children to the Jinn Maimunah and his desperate, hopeless journey to seek the powerful spirit's aid. He showed the Sultan of the Air the dark stone and the amber talisman. The Sultan of the Air listened with the immense, calm patience of time itself. When the prince finished, the Sultan's smoky form shifted, and a deep, resonant voice, like the soft roar of the distant wind, filled the hall. "O mortal prince, your courage is great, but your path is foolish. Maimunah is powerful, and her palace is secured beneath currents that crush mountains. I cannot fight her, for our domains are different, but I can honor the plea of your courage. I will lend you my aid, not to fight, but to guide you to the one being who dares to defy the Queen of the Sea. You must travel further to the legendary Isle of Whispers, where you will find the final true key to your deliverance." The resonant voice of the Sultan of the Air filled the ancient, silent temple, confirming the impossible difficulty of Kamar al-Zaman's quest, yet offering a glimmer of true hope. The prince knelt before the towering, shimmering spirit, absorbing every word with desperate intensity. "I cannot fight Maimunah, prince," the Sultan of the Air reiterated, his voice a profound whisper of the wind. "But there is a being who harbors an ancient, bitter enmity toward the Queen of the Sea, a formidable spirit whose power lies not in the deep, but in the heart of the earth. This is the Sultan of the Black Isles, a potent Ifrit whose history is intertwined with the lineage of Maimunah." The Sultan of the Air then gave Kamar al-Zaman a second vital instruction. He directed the prince to the remote Isle of Whispers, located far to the south of the archipelago of Mist. He warned that this island was protected by terrible, continuous whirlwinds and currents that would destroy any ordinary vessel. "I shall lend you my power," the Sultan of the Air declared. "You cannot reach the Isle of Whispers by a mortal ship. I will give you a protective charm and the means of passage, but your journey will be solitary and terrifying." The immense, shifting form of the Sultan of the Air reached out, and a small, luminous sphere of pale, concentrated light drifted down toward the prince. "Swallow this light, O prince," the spirit commanded. "It will protect your lungs from the pressures of the lower atmosphere and the crushing currents. It will also give you the ability to withstand the speed of the winds I shall summon." Kamar al-Zaman, without hesitation, carefully took the luminous sphere and swallowed it. A wave of cold, clean energy flowed through his body, filling him with a strange, unnatural resilience. Next, the Sultan of the Air instructed the prince to hold the small, amber talisman given by the hermit. The prince grasped the amber firmly, and the Sultan of the Air released a vast, silent current of wind that gathered within the temple hall. The air screamed, but the prince felt only a steady, protective force surrounding him. "You will be carried by the very breath of my domain, Prince of Kaladin," the Sultan announced. "Hold tight, trust the wind, and pray that your courage will be enough to sustain you." With a final, silent roar, the Sultan of the Air released the concentrated force. Kamar al-Zaman was lifted violently from the floor of the temple and propelled into the dense, swirling fog outside. He shot through the skies of the archipelago of mist with unimaginable speed, the wind roaring past his ears. Yet he felt no physical pain or pressure thanks to the luminous charm. He was a mere particle, a single point of human while being driven by the elemental forces of nature toward his destiny. The flight lasted for an entire, terrifying night. The prince saw nothing but the rushing, pale clouds and the distant, cold stars, his senses overwhelmed by the speed. He held the amber talisman like an anchor to reality, his mind fixed only on the image of Budur. As the sun rose, Kamar al-Zaman felt the wind current slowing, descending gradually. He landed softly on the sandy shore of an island cloaked in an eerie, unnatural silence. The air here was heavy and still, the opposite of the windy domain he had just left. This was the Isle of Whispers. The island was shrouded not in fog, but in shadows. The trees were massive and darkly colored, and the ground was covered in fine black sand. There was no sound of birds or the usual life of an island. Kamar al-Zaman, his royal strength renewed by the magical journey, began to walk inland, guided by an intense inner sense of purpose. After walking for several hours, he reached a colossal fortress built entirely of black basalt, its walls seamless and menacing. It was clearly the domain of a power far beyond any mortal king. This was the fortress of the Sultan of the Black Isles, the potent Ifrit who held the key to his confrontation with Maimunah. Kamar al-Zaman approached the enormous silent gate. He was now at the final, most dangerous door of his quest, relying on the ancient enmity between two magical rulers to save his wife and children. He raised his hand and struck the cold, dark basalt of the immense gate, the sound echoing ominously across the dead silence of the Isle of Whispers. Prince Kamar al-Zaman struck the massive, cold basalt gate of the fortress of the Sultan of the Black Isles. The sound was flat and desolate, echoing eerily in the unnatural silence of the Isle of Whispers. For a long, unsettling period, there was no response. The fortress remained dark, imposing, and utterly silent, seeming to absorb the sound and the prince's fragile hope. Just as the prince was about to strike the gate again, a small recessed door high in the wall creaked open. A voice, deep and resonant like the grating of stone upon stone, addressed him. "Who dares to disturb the solemn solitude of the Sultan of the Black Isles? Speak your name and your purpose, mortal, or be consumed by the silence of this domain." Kamar al-Zaman stood tall, despite his humble dervish robes, and replied with the natural authority of his royal lineage. "I am a seeker, a pilgrim driven by a powerful sorrow. I come by the counsel of the Sultan of the Air, and I seek audience with your great Sultan to implore his aid against the Jinn Maimunah." The door remained open for a moment longer, allowing an invisible entity to examine the prince's humble appearance and noble bearing. Then, with a slow grinding roar that shook the very ground, the massive basalt gate began to swing inward, revealing a courtyard shrouded in deep perpetual twilight. Kamar al-Zaman stepped inside the fortress. The air was heavy and warm, carrying the faint, sharp scent of brimstone and ancient earth. The courtyard was vast and empty, paved with polished black stone. Standing at the far end, awaiting him, was a single, immense figure, the Sultan of the Black Isles. The Ifrit Sultan was a terrifying, majestic sight. He was far larger than any human, composed of solid, shimmering darkness, with eyes that burned like embers deep within his smoky form. He held a massive, silent war mace forged from pure shadow. His aura radiated power, not of wind or sea, but of the deep, molten core of the earth itself. The Ifrit spoke, his voice a low thunder that seemed to vibrate through the prince's very bones. "You are an astonishing mortal. Few men dare to cross my threshold, and fewer still come bearing the name of my eternal enemy, the Sultan of the Air. Speak, seeker. Why do you involve yourself in the ancient feuds of the spirits?" Kamar al-Zaman knelt, showing appropriate respect to the immense power before him, but his resolve remained unyielding. He then recounted his entire sorrowful epic from the first magical encounter with the Jinn Maimunah and Danhasch, the exchange of the jewels, his brief, sublime happiness with Budur, to the final, devastating abduction by Maimunah and the cold message on the stone. He presented the dark stone to the Ifrit as proof of his tale. The Sultan of the Black Isles listened with a frightening, silent intensity. His burning eyes never left the prince's face. When Kamar al-Zaman finished, the Ifrit took the stone, examining it with a powerful concentration. "Mum," the Ifrit rumbled, the name sounding like a curse in his deep voice. "She is the granddaughter of my greatest rival. Her lineage has plagued my domain for centuries. She is proud, possessive, and her power over the sea currents is immense. She would indeed take such a jewel of humanity as your queen to be her consort." A cold, fierce light flickered in the Ifrit's ember eyes. "The Sultan of the Air sent you because he knew I would see in your tragic quest an opportunity for vengeance against Mabubah's line. I despise her pride and the tranquility of her deep-sea realm. I shall aid you, mortal prince, not for your love, but for my vengeance." The Ifrit Sultan then outlined a plan, detailing the immense danger involved. Mabubah's palace lies beneath the fiercest, deepest whirlpool in the world, secured by magical currents that crush any mortal vessel. I cannot enter her domain directly without igniting a war that would tear the world asunder. But I can give you the Ring of the Deep and the means to descend. The Ifrit withdrew from a hidden compartment on his massive throne a single, unadorned ring made of pure black iron. "This ring," he commanded, "will protect you from the crushing pressure and the icy cold of the deepest ocean. More importantly, it will grant you the ability to breathe underwater. You must descend alone, enter her palace, and retrieve your queen and children while she is away on her solitary night flight. If you fail to retrieve them before her return, neither you nor your family will ever see the light of the sun again." Kamar al-Zaman accepted the heavy, cold ring with silent reverence and gratitude. He knew the mission was one of suicide, but the prospect of seeing Budur again fueled his exhausted spirit. He bowed deeply to the immense Sultan of the Black Isles and prepared for the final, terrifying descent into the black heart of the sea. Prince Kamar al-Zaman, armed with the heavy black ring of the deep gifted by the Sultan of the Black Isles, stood ready to begin the final, terrifying phase of his quest. He knew that this descent into the darkest reaches of the ocean was a journey no mortal was meant to survive. Yet the burning image of Princess Budur and his children, Amjad and Azad, gave him a cold, absolute resolve. He said a profound, silent farewell to the dry land and the distant, familiar world he was leaving behind. The Ifrit Sultan of the Black Isles, with a mere gesture of his immense, shadowy hand, opened a subterranean passage from the fortress directly to the sea. The passage led to a desolate, turbulent stretch of water marked by a massive, perpetual whirlpool, the very nexus where Mabubah's palace lay hidden. Kamar al-Zaman walked the dark, damp passage, emerging onto a narrow, slick rock overlooking the ferocious, spinning currents. The whirlpool was a colossal, terrifying sight, a continuous, roaring vortex that seemed to suck the very light and air down into the abyss. It was the crushing, churning doorway to the kingdom of the sea Jinn. He paused for a long moment, clutching his simple dagger and the dark, cold stone that bore the Jinn's message. He then slipped the Ring of the Deep onto his finger. The black iron instantly felt heavy, yet simultaneously comforting. He took one final deep breath of the surface air, closed his eyes, and plunged himself deliberately into the heart of the roaring, icy whirlpool. The pressure and the violence were instantaneous and absolute. He was tossed and spun mercilessly, the crushing power of the current threatening to tear him apart. But the Ring of the Deep immediately began its silent, miraculous work. A thin, invisible shield of heat and strength enveloped his body, protecting him from the crushing hydrostatic pressure that would have instantly pulverized any normal vessel or man. As the current dragged him deeper, the luminous sphere he had swallowed, the gift of the Sultan of the Air, activated the ring's full protective power. Suddenly, the roaring in his ears subsided, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. He opened his eyes. He was deep underwater, yet he was breathing effortlessly, the magical ring converting the dissolved oxygen in the water into a life-giving breath that filled his lungs with cool, clean air. The underwater world that greeted him was one of both terrifying blackness and ethereal, silent beauty. He passed through layer after layer of the ocean, where the light of the sun became only a distant, pale memory. He saw gigantic, slow-moving creatures of the deep and colossal, silent rock formations that looked like the ruins of ancient, forgotten worlds. The intense cold was held at bay by the warm shield of the Ifrit's ring. He descended for an endless duration, moving past the known boundaries of the world, until he finally reached the abyssal plain, a vast, silent expanse covered in dark silt. And then, in the distance, he saw it, the radiant, shimmering glow of Mahbuba's secret palace. The palace was constructed entirely of smooth, luminous coral, a structure of impossible, delicate beauty that glowed with a cool, internalized light, defying the darkness of the deep. It was a sprawling, majestic structure, protected by silent, enormous guards, powerful, aquatic Ifrits of Mahbuba's own lineage, who stood motionless, their eyes glowing with a cold, pale light. Kamar al-Zaman, moving silently and cautiously on the sea floor, used the darkness and the immense, sheltering rocks to approach the palace. His simple dervish robes blended with the shadows, and the ring of the deep rendered him utterly silent to the ears of the aquatic Jinn. He moved like a ghost through the silent gardens of sea flowers and strange, glowing plants that surrounded the magnificent coral walls. He found a small secondary entrance to the palace, a fissure concealed by ancient, hanging kelp. He slipped through the opening and entered the serene inner chambers of the Jinn's realm. The air inside the palace was warm and dry, miraculously separated from the cold water outside by the powerful magic of Mahbuba. The floors were paved with pearls, and the walls shimmered with every conceivable color of coral. He moved silently through the deserted halls, guided by a father's instinct and a lover's powerful yearning. The palace was empty of Mahbuba or her main retinue, confirming the Ifrit Sultan's counsel that she was away on her solitary night flight. He finally reached a vast central hall, and there, in a large, luxurious chamber at the far end, surrounded by silk curtains and soft, strange deep-sea light, he found them. Princess Budur was awake, sitting serenely on a couch of pearl-encrusted shell. Her children, Umjud and Azad, were sleeping peacefully beside her. She was wearing a gown of woven sea silk, her face pale with sadness, but her eyes possessed the quiet, unbreakable resolve that Kamar al-Zaman knew so well. Budur looked up, sensing his presence. She saw the figure of the dervish, dripping wet, standing in the doorway. She saw the prince's familiar, magnificent eyes, filled with love and immense relief, and instantly recognized her husband. She rushed to him, her heart overflowing with a joy that defied the crushing pressure of the sea around them. The reunion of Prince Kamar al-Zaman and Princess Budur in the silent, luminous palace of coral was a moment of profound, wordless ecstasy. Budur rushed into her husband's arms, weeping tears of joy and relief that defied the cold reality of their surroundings. Kamar al-Zaman held her tightly, his dervish robes soaked with water, and his heart overflowing with the immense relief of a quest completed. The long years of solitary sorrow and hopeless searching vanished in that single, tender embrace. After a long moment, Budur, remembering the immediate danger, pulled back slightly, her eyes filled with renewed urgency. "Oh, my king, my husband, how did you achieve this miracle? How did you penetrate the fortress of Maimunah? We must not linger. She is powerful, malicious, and she flies back before the dawn. She will find us, and her wrath will be terrible." Kamar al-Zaman spoke quickly, calmly explaining his long, perilous journey, the counsel of the wise hermit, the dangerous flight with the Sultan of the Air, the aid of the mighty Ifrit Sultan of the Black Isles, and the protection of the Ring of the Deep. He showed her the black iron ring on his finger, which glistened in the coral light, the key to his presence in this impossible place. "The Ifrit Sultan told me the Queen of the Sea is away on her solitary night flight," Kamar al-Zaman urged. "We have only a brief window of safety. We must retrieve our children and descend back into the water immediately. The ring can protect all of us for a limited time." Budur turned immediately to their two sleeping children, Umjud and Azad, who lay peacefully in a large, pearl-encrusted shell bed. The sight of them, safe and untouched by the Jinn's cruelty, renewed Kamar al-Zaman's strength. They woke the children gently, explaining only that they were leaving the Sea Palace for a swift journey home. Budur quickly dressed the children in their warmest, simplest garments. She retrieved the most precious relic of their entire history, a pearl necklace which Maimunah had left untouched, perhaps considering it a mere piece of human trinket compared to her own treasures. Kamar al-Zaman secured the children, placing a protective hand on each one. As they moved through the silent, glowing halls of the palace, Kamar al-Zaman paused. "Oh, Budur," he whispered urgently. "Maimunah must not know we have escaped immediately. We must leave a sign that delays her pursuit. The Ifrit spoke of vengeance. We must aid his cause." Budur, instantly understanding the strategic necessity, had a sudden, brilliant idea. She knew that Maimunah's greatest treasure was not gold or jewels, but the palace itself, which she considered a flawless work of art and a symbol of her eternal power. Using Kamar al-Zaman's dagger, she quickly scratched a crude but deliberate symbol on one of the large, luminous coral columns, the symbol known in the lore of the Jinn to represent the Sultan of the Black Isles. It was a silent, infuriating challenge, designed to make Maimunah believe that her ancient enemy had dared to trespass and destroy her possessions. They then made their way to the small, concealed fissure through which Kamar al-Zaman had entered. The prince led the way, ensuring that the children were safe between him and Budur. They slipped out of the dry, warm palace and back into the cold, silent world of the deep ocean. The descent had been terrifying, but the ascent was grueling, demanding every ounce of Kamar al-Zaman's strength. He had to guide his family upward, pushing through the cold currents, relying entirely on the diminishing protective power of the Ring of the Deep. Budur, holding their daughter, used the training she received as Gayer to remain composed and assist her husband. After what felt like an eternity, during which the prince feared the ring's protection would fail, they began to feel a change in the light and the pressure. The blackness gave way to a pale, ethereal blue, a sign that they were nearing the surface in the ferocious whirlpool. The prince guided his family through the final, violent turbulence of the currents. With a final, desperate surge of will, they burst through the surface of the water, gasping for air, into the cold, damp pre-dawn air near the Isle of Whispers. Kamar al-Zaman immediately pulled them onto a small, safe outcropping of rock, exhausted, but miraculously alive. They were out of Maimunah's domain, but they were still on the most dangerous, magical island in the world. Prince Kamar al-Zaman and his family rested for only a brief period on the cold, slick rocks near the Isle of Whispers. Exhaustion was heavy upon them, but the fear of Maimunah's imminent return was a far greater motivator. The prince knew that once the Jinn discovered the empty chamber and the defiant symbol left behind, her rage would be instant and devastating, sweeping across the sea like a vengeful storm. Kamar al-Zaman, his strength renewed by the sight of his queen and children, led them inland, back toward the colossal black fortress of the Sultan of the Black Isles. He still wore the humble dervish robes, but his demeanor was once again that of a king, resolute and focused. They reached the ominous, silent walls of the fortress. The immense basalt gate remained slightly ajar, just as he had left it. He entered the courtyard, supporting Budur and carrying his daughter, Azad, while Budur held Umjud close. The Sultan of the Black Isles, sensing their return, appeared instantly, his shadowy form filling the twilight courtyard. His ember eyes shone with fierce satisfaction as he saw the prince, the princess, and the two children alive and safe. "Mortal prince," the Ifrit rumbled, his voice like grinding stone, "you have achieved the impossible. You have stolen the prized possessions of Mahbuba from the very heart of her deep-sea fortress. And by your act of defiance, you have given me the vengeance I craved." Kamar al-Zaman bowed deeply, filled with gratitude that transcended the fear of the powerful spirit. "Almighty Sultan," he said, his voice steady, "I offer you my eternal gratitude. Your aid has restored my life and my soul. I must now implore your help once more, to secure our safe passage away from this dangerous place before Mahbuba's vengeance descend upon us." The Ifrit Sultan granted the request instantly, his mood fueled by the anticipation of his rival's fury. "The moment Mahbuba finds the sign you left, her wrath will be unleashed. She will believe I dared to trespass. I shall meet her fury with fire and shield the sea routes temporarily. But you must be swift." The Sultan of the Black Isles created a magical conduit, a dry, warm tunnel that pierced the very core of the earth, leading from the Isle of Whispers directly to a remote, safe coast far from the Isles of the Mist. Kamar al-Zaman led his family into the tunnel, the last sight of the Ifrit Sultan being his massive, shadowy form preparing for the imminent, magical battle with the Queen of the Sea. The journey through the tunnel was long but safe, a silent contrast to the violence of the ocean. When they finally emerged, they found themselves on a quiet, sunlit coast of a vast, temperate continent, thousands of leagues away from Mahbuba's wrath. Here, Kamar al-Zaman sold the remainder of his small coins to purchase new, humble clothing for his family and passage on the first caravan heading inland, away from the treacherous sea. They traveled for weeks, finding solace in the simple rhythm of the caravan life and the joy of their reunion. Meanwhile, back at the Coral Palace, the Jinn Mahbuba returned from her flight. She entered her palace, expecting to find her new, magnificent human consort and her children awaiting her. When she discovered the chamber empty, her rage was immediate and earth-shattering. Her fury multiplied tenfold when she found the deliberately scratched symbol of the Sultan of the Black Isles on her pristine coral column. Believing she had been mocked and betrayed by her ancient enemy, Mahbuba gathered her forces and unleashed a terrifying magical storm of vengeance, tearing the ocean apart and launching a direct assault on the domain of the Ifrit Sultan. The resulting battle between the two powerful spirits shook the foundations of the magical world, providing the perfect distraction for the fleeing royal family. Kamar al-Zaman and Budur, resting in a quiet inland city, felt only a faint, distant tremor in the earth, a final sign that the great trial was over and their escape was complete. They were finally safe, free from the direct threat of the Jinn, but they were still far from their home and their kingdom, alone in a vast, unknown world. The journey home to the islands of Caladan, to tell the tale of their double rescue and their victory over the Queen of the Sea, still lay ahead. Prince Kamar al-Zaman and Princess Budur, along with their children Umjud and Azad, settled into a quiet, temporary refuge in the small inland city where the Ifrit Sultan's magical tunnel had delivered them. They were in a vast, prosperous kingdom far from the Isles of Caladan, a place where their royal titles held no meaning, allowing them the precious gift of anonymity. For the first time since their miraculous escape from the depths of the sea, they enjoyed a period of profound calm rest. They leased a small, humble house, living as a simple family of travelers. Budur, relieved of the heavy burdens of disguise and fear, dedicated herself to restoring the health and peace of mind of their children, who slowly began to forget the strange, silent time in the Coral Palace. Kamar al-Zaman, his heart full of gratitude for his regained family, found solace in the simple routine of providing for them, completely unconcerned with the grand affairs of his distant kingdom. They often sat together in the quiet evenings, the children sleeping soundly, recounting the incredible trials they had endured. They realized that their love had not only survived two powerful magical enchantments, but had grown stronger through the shared terror and the immense distance they had traveled to find one another. Their brief, shared history of sorrow, separation, and secret companionship as Gayer had made their current peace invaluable. During this period of quiet reflection, Kamar al-Zaman knew they could not remain in hiding forever. His duty to his aging father, Sultan Shahriman, and his responsibility to his people weighed heavily upon him. He needed to find a way to finance the long, expensive journey back to the islands of Caladan, an ocean away. He still possessed the Ring of the Deep and the magnificent pearl necklace, Budur's own jewel, but he hesitated to sell or use these unique magical objects. The ring was a relic of their rescue, and the necklace was the symbol of their entire magical history. Instead, Kamar al-Zaman decided to rely on his innate royal skill and knowledge. He sought out the local merchants and scholars, presenting himself as a seasoned foreign traveler with extensive knowledge of global markets and rare commodities. His natural authority, coupled with his deep understanding of politics and trade, quickly earned him respect and trust among the local traders. He began to work diligently, using his sharp intellect to broker several successful trade deals for the local merchants, advising them on shipments and routes. Within a few months of disciplined, focused work, Kamar al-Zaman had accumulated a modest, yet sufficient, sum of gold, enough to charter passage on a vessel heading toward the western sea routes that would eventually lead them back toward their homeland. Budur, watching her husband transform from a wandering dervish to an astute merchant and back to his true, royal self, felt immense pride. He had proven his worth in every possible guise and circumstance. The time for rest came to an end. Kamar al-Zaman informed his family that the long journey home was about to commence. He found a sturdy, reliable merchant vessel, the captain of which was preparing for a lengthy voyage across the Western Ocean. He chartered a discreet, secure passage for himself and his family, paying the captain in advance. The night before their departure, Kamar al-Zaman placed the Ring of the Deep and the Jinn's dark stone in a heavy sealed coffer, along with the pearl necklace. These objects of power and memory were too dangerous and too precious to wear or display, but they were a permanent part of their story. They left the quiet, kind city under the cloak of dawn, bidding farewell to the land that had sheltered them from the wrath of the Queen of the Sea. They boarded the ship, the salty air and the vast horizon stretching out before them once more. The voyage home would be long and challenging, but they were together, a unit forged in fire and magic, and their hearts were finally filled with the secure anticipation of their return to the islands of Caladan and the warm embrace of Sultan Shahriman. The sea, once the source of their deepest sorrow, was now their only path to lasting peace. The voyage home began with tranquility and quiet contentment. Prince Kamar al-Zaman, Princess Budur, and their children Umjud and Azad were safely secured in their private cabin aboard the merchant vessel. The sea was calm, and the captain, a reliable seasoned sailor, charted a steady course toward the familiar western horizons that would eventually lead to the islands of Caladan. For many months, the journey was characterized by serene monotony. The family found joy in the simple rhythm of the sea, the gentle rocking of the ship, the sound of the waves against the hull, and the vast blue expanse that surrounded them. Kamar al-Zaman often spent his hours on the deck, not as a dervish or a prince, but as a watchful, devoted father, teaching his children the names of the distant stars and the patterns of the sea currents. Budur, her serenity fully restored, spent her time in quiet contemplation, weaving simple toys for the children and reflecting on the incredible story of their lives. They often spoke of Sultan Shahriman, their hearts filled with the anticipation of his joy upon seeing them safe and sound. They knew that the sight of Budur alive and well, and a reunion with his grandchildren would heal the old sultan's sorrow and secure the succession of the kingdom. However, as the ship neared the halfway point of its long journey, crossing into a region known for its unpredictable weather and ancient dark legends, the tranquility of the voyage was suddenly and violently shattered. One night, a terrifying tornado struck the ship without warning. Unlike the magical storm that had separated Budur from the vizier years ago, this was a natural, physical force of immense and devastating power. The wind screamed through the rigging, and the waves rose into colossal, churning mountains that dwarfed the vessel. The captain and his crew fought valiantly, their faces etched with terror, but the sheer force of the storm proved overwhelming. The ship's main mast snapped, and the hull began to take on water rapidly. Kamar al-Zaman rushed to his family, securing the children in their arms, knowing that the time for escape had come. He grabbed the heavy sealed coffer containing the ring of the deep, the pearl necklace, and the Jinn's dark stone. He wrapped Budur and the children in thick protective sailcloth, preparing to throw them into the raging sea with any piece of floating debris he could find. As he prepared for this terrifying leap, a colossal wave crashed over the deck, tearing Kamar al-Zaman from the rail. Budur screamed his name, but the wave swept him away instantly, carrying him into the turbulent, dark heart of the storm. Budur, clinging desperately to the rail, saw the faint, desperate flash of her husband's face before he was swallowed by the churning water. She cried out in despair, but she had no time for grief. The ship was breaking apart beneath her. With immense courage born of necessity, she quickly tied the two children securely to a large, broken piece of the mast, a sturdy piece of wood that offered a chance of survival. She then secured the heavy coffer containing the magical relics to her own waist. She looked at the children one last time, whispered words of comfort and absolute courage, and then launched herself and the children into the raging water. The large, heavy piece of mast, with Budur and the two small, frightened children clinging to it, was tossed mercilessly by the violent waves. The storm raged for the remainder of the night, subjecting them to a relentless, cold, and terrifying assault. When the merciful light of dawn finally broke, the storm had miraculously subsided, leaving the sea calm but desolate. Budur lay exhausted upon the floating mast, barely conscious, but her eyes immediately checked on her children. Umjud and Azad were safe, though terrified and soaked with seawater. The tragic reality quickly set in. Kamar al-Zaman was gone. he had vanished into the immense, indifferent ocean, and this time, there was no sign of a Jinn's abduction, no mysterious message, only the brutal, final silence of the sea. Budur was once again completely alone, a queen without a king, a mother adrift with her children. But she still possessed the heavy coffer, the key to their past and perhaps their future. She looked around the deserted, endless ocean. In the distance, she saw a large, dark shape on the horizon, a continent of land. With a quiet, fierce determination that had once allowed her to travel the world disguised as Gaia, she began to paddle the heavy mast toward the distant, beckoning shore, driven by the sole, absolute duty of protecting her children and securing their return to the islands of Caladan. Princess Budur, clinging desperately to the heavy, broken mast, endured the remaining hours of the night and the early morning. Her physical exhaustion was total, yet her maternal resolve remained a sharp, unyielding core. She focused only on the distant, dark shape of land, paddling the unwieldy raft with slow, methodical strokes, protecting her children, Umjud and Azad, from the waves. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, the floating mast scraped against the soft, warm sand of a sprawling, magnificent continent. Budur dragged herself and her two terrified, clinging children onto the safety of the shore, collapsing completely from sheer physical strain. They were alive, but utterly destitute and alone, once again cast upon an unknown land far from their kingdom. After a long period of rest, Budur began to assess their situation. The land was vast and seemed to be inhabited, though she saw no immediate signs of a city or village. Their only possessions were the simple damp clothes on their backs and a heavy sealed coffer containing the relics of their destiny, the Ring of the Deep, the pearl necklace, and the Jinn's dark stone. Budur knew that these magical items were both their greatest hope and their greatest danger. They represented immense wealth and power, but to be found in possession of such treasures in this state of destitution would surely lead to immediate suspicion, questioning, or worse, theft and possible harm to her and her children. She resolved to protect the coffer at all costs. She led the children inland, away from the immediate shore, finding a secluded, silent spot beneath a trio of massive ancient trees. The soil here was soft and loamy. Budur embraced her children, whispering words of courage and assuring them that they would be home soon. Then, using a large, sharp stone, she began the arduous, painstaking work of digging a deep, safe hiding place. She labored until the hole was deep enough to conceal the heavy coffer completely. With sorrowful reluctance, she placed the sealed coffer into the earth. Before covering it, she looked at the heavy box, knowing she was burying the physical symbols of Kamar al-Zaman and their shared magical past. She was burying her proof, her wealth, and her only means of swift identification. But she knew that only this act of concealment could ensure their immediate safety and survival. She covered the spot carefully, smoothing the earth, replacing the leaves and forest debris until the spot was utterly indistinguishable from the surrounding forest floor. To mark the hidden spot, she performed a small ceremonial act, tying a simple knot of grass onto the lowest branch of the central ancient tree, a silent, secret testament to the treasure hidden beneath. With the heavy burden of the coffer lifted, Budur felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. She now possessed nothing but her wits and the clothes on her back, relying entirely on the courage that had once transformed her into the humble merchant, Gaia. She took her children and began walking, seeking the nearest sign of human civilization. After walking for several hours, she reached the edge of a great paved road, a clear sign that she was in a well-organized kingdom. Soon, a passing caravan approached, a long, magnificent procession of camels and merchants carrying rich silks and spices. The leader of the caravan, a kind and wealthy old merchant, paused upon seeing the distraught woman and her two small pale children standing alone by the roadside. The merchant, moved by Budur's noble bearing despite her wet, simple clothes, approached her with kindness. "Who are you, dear lady?" he asked gently. "And how came you to be stranded here, alone with these children?" Budur, adopting the composed, sorrowful persona she had perfected as Gayer, replied with measured grace, weaving a simple, believable tragedy. "My husband, a traveling scholar, died suddenly on the road, and the rest of our company abandoned us, leaving us without coins or protection. I beg of your charity, take us to the nearest city, where I may seek honest work and refuge." The kind merchant, fully believing her tale of woe, immediately offered her passage and protection. He was deeply impressed by her quiet dignity and the innate nobility that shone through her distress. The caravan brought Budur and her children to a major capital city of the kingdom, a bustling, magnificent place. The kind merchant, finding her manner too noble for mere servant work, offered her position that would use her sharp intellect and excellent education. She would oversee the accounts and transactions of his private household, a position of trust and quiet responsibility. Budur accepted with immense gratitude. She had secured immediate safety and stability for her children. She settled into the rhythm of the city, working diligently and living quietly, but her heart remained focused on a single, silent promise: saving enough money to one day return to that secluded spot in the forest, retrieve the symbols of her destiny, and continue the long, final journey home to the islands of Caladan. Princess Budur, now known by a new, simple name befitting a foreign scholar's widow, settled into her new life of quiet servitude in the magnificent capital city. Her work as the chief accountant for the kind merchant's household was a perfect fit for her sharp intellect and excellent royal education. She managed the intricate records of silks, spices, and trade routes with flawless efficiency, quickly earning the immense trust and respect of her generous employer. Her life was one of relentless work and quiet devotion. She lived only for her children, Umjud and Azad, ensuring their comfort, safety, and continued education. She maintained her simple, sorrowful persona, never once revealing the immense secret of her royal lineage or the magical trials she had endured. Her heart, however, remained a lonely, vigilant fortress, perpetually focused on the hidden spot in the forest where the heavy coffer, containing the symbols of her destiny, lay buried. Years passed in this manner, characterized by stability and the slow, steady accumulation of savings. Umjud and Azad grew into beautiful, noble children, inheriting the regal bearing and intelligence of both their parents. Budur watched them proudly, teaching them the importance of humility, resilience, and faith, preparing them for the day when they would finally return to their rightful home in the islands of Caladan. Meanwhile, Prince Kamar al-Zaman, swept away by the brutal tornado during the sea voyage, had not perished, though his survival was a second, near impossible miracle. He was tossed by the raging storm for days until he was finally cast, half dead, upon a distant, desolate shore. He had lost everything: his family, the ship, and the heavy coffer containing the magical relics. He survived only by the fragile thread of his unyielding will. He spent months in despair, recovering his strength in a remote fishing village. The despair was twofold: the loss of Budur and the children, and the terrible realization that he had also lost the Ring of the Deep and the pearl necklace, the only physical evidence of their magical journey and the key to his father's unwavering belief in the truth. He was now merely a destitute stranger in a strange land, his story too fantastic and immense to be believed by any ordinary person. Kamar al-Zaman, accepting his lonely fate, once again took on the disguise of a wandering, humble dervish. He traveled vast, immense distances, driven now by the faint hope that he might somehow, somewhere, find his lost family, or at least the coffer containing the crucial relics. He survived by the charity of villagers, and by using his innate charm and knowledge to tell soothing, poetic tales of the stars and the sea. After years of relentless, agonizing travel across vast kingdoms and continents, a cruel twist of fate, guided by the silent, relentless hand of destiny, brought Prince Kamar al-Zaman to the very city where his wife and children were now living in quiet anonymity. He arrived in the capital city, his simple robes worn and faded, his face etched with years of sorrow, but his eyes still carrying the noble, intense light of a king. He knew no one here, but the city was a hub of trade, and he hoped to find passage on a vessel heading back toward the east. One day, while sitting in a quiet, secluded square near the central market, Kamar al-Zaman began to tell a small group of listeners a story, a tale of sorrow and magic, of a prince who lost his ring, found a queen, lost her to the sea, and lost her again in a final, cruel storm. He spoke with the eloquent, mesmerizing voice of a royal storyteller, weaving the incredible truth of his life into a sorrowful, fantastical narrative. The children, Amjad and Azad, were passing through the square with their mother, Princess Budur, running a small errand for the merchant. The moment they heard the familiar, unique cadence of the storyteller's voice, they stopped. They were too young to remember their father's voice clearly, but the sorrowful resonance of the dervish's tale struck a deep, familiar chord in their young hearts. Budur, walking slightly ahead, also paused. The voice, though roughened by years of hardship and sun, held an unmistakable, powerful familiarity that sent a wave of pure shock through her heart. She slowly turned and looked at the storyteller, the simple dervish sitting under the shade of a great oak. She recognized the noble, sorrow-etched features instantly. The man telling the incredible, impossible story of the lost Queen Budur, and the prince was none other than her beloved husband, Prince Kamar al-Zaman. Their solitary, agonizing separation was finally over, but they were separated only by a few feet of distance and the terrifying immediate necessity of discretion. Princess Budur stood frozen at the edge of the square, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. The sight of Prince Kamar al-Zaman, alive, yet tragically worn and disguised as a dervish, was an overwhelming wave of relief, joy, and profound sorrow all at once. Her eyes, filled with tears she dared not shed, swept over his worn clothes, his sun-beaten face, and the desperate, noble fire still burning in his eyes. Her children, Amjad and Azad, sensing their mother's distress, held her hands tightly, their young eyes fixed on the man whose mesmerizing, melancholic voice was telling the tale of their own unbelievable life. Budur knew that one reckless move, one sudden, uncontrolled cry of joy, could expose them all to danger. They were safe here only because they were anonymous. Kamar al-Zaman, lost in the sorrow of his narration, had not yet recognized the two children and the quietly dressed widow standing before him. She composed herself instantly, drawing on the immense discipline she had perfected as the merchant Gair. She led her children gently away from the direct gaze of the storyteller, moving them into the shadow of a nearby stall. She instructed the children softly, "Remain here, my darlings. A strange magic is at work. Do not speak. Watch and be silent." Budur then approached Kamar al-Zaman as a curious, respectful stranger, a simple widow moved by the dervish's sorrowful tale. She dropped a small copper coin into the worn bowl placed before him, a gesture of charity and respect. As she did so, her eyes met his. Kamar al-Zaman's gaze, though distant with the pain of his memories, paused on her face. He saw a woman of immense grace and noble bearing, whose eyes held a deep, unreadable compassion. He felt a powerful, inexplicable familiarity, a recognition that transcended the simple, plain clothes she wore. The sorrow in her eyes, mirrored his own. Yet, years of disappointment and loss had taught him caution. Budur, without speaking a word, used a silent, prearranged signal from their shared past, a faint, almost imperceptible tilt of her head, reminiscent of a private jest they shared during their time as prince and heir. Kamar al-Zaman's eyes widened slightly. The movement, the silent signal, the unique shape of her gaze. It was an unmistakable echo of his queen. The story on his lips faltered. He knew, with a certainty that shook his ravaged soul, that this was Budur. He maintained his composure, speaking only to the crowd, his voice regaining its strength. And thus, gentle listeners, the prince continues his lonely search, sustained only by a fragile memory, praying that fate will one day allow him to see his queen again, if only for a final, sorrowful glance. Budur, maintaining her role as a generous stranger, waited until the small crowd dispersed. She then approached Kamar al-Zaman, her voice low and steady. "O esteemed dervish," she said, using a neutral, formal tone, "your tale of the lost prince and the courageous queen has moved my heart. I am but a humble servant in the household of a wealthy merchant. If you are in need of a quiet sanctuary for the night, my master is known for his charity. I can guide you to our gate." Kamar al-Zaman understood the profound, silent message. She was offering sanctuary, discreetly, away from the prying eyes of the city. He accepted with a humble bow, the dervish persona perfectly maintained. "Your kindness is a blessing, kind woman. I accept your generous offer with immense gratitude." Budur led her husband back through the bustling streets of the city to the large, discreet house of the merchant. As they walked, she paused only briefly at the corner where Amjad and Azad were waiting. She gathered them into her arms and presented them to the dervish as merely "my children." Kamar al-Zaman, seeing the two beautiful, noble-faced children, instantly recognized the royal features of his own lost heirs. The sight was almost too much for his weary heart. He knelt and embraced them gently, his eyes speaking volumes of a father's love and relief, even as his lips remained silent and restrained. Budur led the dervish into the back entrance of the merchant's house, ushering him into a small, private guest room. She ensured the door was securely locked and turned to her husband, her face finally allowing the flood of emotion to surface. The years of separation, the pain, the fear, and the miraculous double survival converged in a final, powerful moment. The humble servant and the wandering dervish fell into each other's arms, their tears flowing freely, sealing the end of their second, long, agonizing separation. The initial flood of tears and the intense, silent embrace in the small, locked guest room lasted until the edge of twilight. Prince Kamar al-Zaman and Princess Budur sat together, hand in hand, recounting the long, agonizing details of their second separation. They shared their despair over the final storm, the loss of the coffer, Kamar al-Zaman's subsequent dervish journey, and Budur's survival and establishment in the kind merchant's household. Kamar al-Zaman spoke of the heartbreak of losing the Ring of the Deep and the pearl necklace, fearing he had lost the irrefutable evidence that could prove their fantastic story to the world. Budur smiled gently, a look of profound relief and triumph on her face. "My king," she whispered, her voice filled with tenderness. "Fate was cruel, but not completely merciless. I feared the crushing weight of the magical relics would sink me, so I secured the heavy coffer to my waist before the wave took you. When I was cast upon this shore, I feared more than anything that the powerful, unique jewels would lead to our discovery and ruin. I did not lose them, I merely hid them." Kamar al-Zaman's heart leaped with sudden, immense relief. "Budur, my queen, where did you hide them? Are they safe?" Budur described the secluded spot in the forest, the trio of ancient trees, and the simple knotted grass that marked the burial site. She had kept the secret perfectly for years, sharing it with no one. The restoration of the physical symbols of their destiny, the ring and the necklace, was the final, missing piece of their reconciliation. They knew they could not delay. The following morning, before the city awoke, Kamar al-Zaman, still in his dervish robes, and Budur, feigning an early trip for supplies, slipped away from the merchant's household. They carried only a small, sturdy shovel and walked quickly, following the precise directions Budur had held captive in her memory for years. They reached the edge of the forest just as the first rays of the sun pierced the dense foliage. Budur led Kamar al-Zaman directly to the trio of ancient trees. Her heart pounded as she pointed to the lowest branch of the central tree, where the simple grass knot, faded but intact, still rested. Kamar al-Zaman, his hands trembling with emotion, began to dig the earth beneath the mark. The soil was soft, and soon the shovel struck wood. They quickly uncovered the heavy, sealed coffer. With immense care, Kamar al-Zaman broke the seal and opened the chest. The contents lay intact and untouched by the years. The massive black ring of the deep, the dark, ominous Jinn stone, and the magnificent, lustrous pearl necklace. The sight of these magical relics, lying together in the chest, confirmed the unbelievable truth of their entire life. They were no longer two impoverished travelers. They were a king and queen, armed with the evidence of their destiny. They wept again, this time tears of silent, overwhelming triumph. They secured the heavy coffer, realizing that they could not carry such a valuable, cumbersome object on a long, arduous journey back to the coast. They decided to return to the kind merchant's house. Budur would confess her true identity to her benefactor, a man she had grown to trust implicitly, and ask for his aid. Upon their return, Budur immediately sought a private audience with the kind merchant who had given her years of protection and peace. She revealed the entire astonishing story, her true name, her royal lineage, the magical trials, the abduction by the Jinn, her husband's sorrowful journey, and the final miraculous reunion. She presented him with a pearl necklace and the ring of the deep as undeniable proof. The merchant, a man of deep faith and wisdom, was astonished, yet utterly convinced by the magnificence of the jewels and the undeniable nobility that suddenly shone through Budur's composure. He immediately knelt before her, begging forgiveness for having treated her as a mere servant. Budur quickly raised him, assuring him of her eternal gratitude. She then explained their need. "We must return to the islands of Khaladan to save my aging father-in-law, Sultan Shahriman. We implore your aid to secure and guard our precious coffer until our return, and to arrange passage on the swiftest, most secure vessel heading east." The kind merchant, honored to serve a true queen, agreed instantly. He swore secrecy, arranged for the safe transport of the coffer to his impenetrable private vault, and immediately began preparations to charter a magnificent, dedicated vessel to carry the long-lost royal family back to their homeland. The long years of wandering and separation were finally over. The voyage home, to claim their true destiny, was about to begin. The devoted merchant, keeping his word in the secret of the royal family, spared no expense in preparing the voyage home. He chartered the most luxurious and swift vessel available, staffing it with a loyal and discreet crew. He ensured the ship was provisioned for the long, months-long journey back to the islands of Khaladan, a kingdom that had mourned the loss of its crown prince and princess for years. Prince Kamar al-Zaman and Princess Budur, accompanied by their children Umjud and Azad, bid a heartfelt, secret farewell to their kind benefactor. They sailed away from the strange continent under the light of a new moon, their hearts filled with serene joy and the powerful anticipation of home. They were no longer the hunted, heartbroken wanderers. They were a united royal family returning to claim their destiny. The long voyage across the familiar seas was filled with deep, restorative peace. Kamar, al-Zaman, and Budur spent their days preparing their children for the reality of their royal lives, teaching them the history of the islands of Khaldun and the Kingdom of China. They recounted the incredible saga of their magical union and the two agonizing separations, emphasizing the importance of courage, love, and faith in the face of impossible trials. Finally, after months of uninterrupted sailing, the ship approached the familiar, magnificent coastline of the islands of Khaldun. The sight of the towering white walls and the glittering domes of the capital city, which had once been the source of the prince's sorrow and later his greatest happiness, brought tears to the eyes of Kamar al-Zaman. They anchored the ship in a quiet, secluded cove near the palace gardens, choosing to keep their arrival secret until they could present themselves directly to the aging Sultan Shahriman. Kamar al-Zaman, wearing simple but noble traveling clothes, led his family toward the palace gates in the soft light of the evening. The guards at the gate, seeing the noble bearing of the stranger and the magnificent presence of the woman and the two exquisite children, hesitated to refuse them entry. Kamar al-Zaman spoke with the clear, commanding voice of the crown prince, demanding immediate audience with the Sultan Shahriman, claiming to carry news of immense importance. Sultan Shahriman, now frail and weary, spent his days in quiet sorrow, his heart still mourning the loss of his son and his family to the Silent Sea. When the vizier informed him that a strange nobleman insisted on an immediate, secret audience, the Sultan agreed, hoping for distraction from his grief. The moment Kamar al-Zaman stepped into the royal hall, Sultan Shahriman recognized the face that had haunted his dreams, his beloved son, aged by suffering but radiating an undeniable strength. The Sultan cried out his son's name, rising from his throne with sudden, powerful surge of joy, the years of sorrow instantly lifting from his shoulders. Kamar al-Zaman rushed to his father, kneeling to embrace him. Then he led forward Princess Budur, radiant, majestic, and wearing the simple, dignified gown of a queen. She knelt before the Sultan, her eyes filled with tenderness. "Oh, my king, my father," Kamar al-Zaman announced, his voice ringing with triumph. "The dead have returned. The sea did not claim us, but a long, cruel destiny. Behold your daughter, Princess Budur, and behold your two grandchildren, Amjad and Azad." The Sultan, weeping tears of pure, overwhelming happiness, embraced Budur, then clasped his two magnificent grandchildren to his chest. The entire court, which had been silent witnesses to the astonishing scene, erupted in a spontaneous, powerful roar of joy and gratitude. Kamar al-Zaman then presented the final, absolute proof, the magnificent pearl necklace of Budur and the mighty black ring of the deep, placed on a velvet cushion. He recounted the entire impossible saga, the second devastating storm, the magical abduction by the Jinn Maimunah, his lonely dervish quest, the aid of the two great spirits, the Sultan of the Air and the Sultan of the Black Isles, and the final miraculous reunion in the silent hidden city. Sultan Shahriman, convinced by the undeniable evidence and the profound truth in his son's eyes, could only express profound gratitude to the heavens for the return of his family. The next day, the entire city of Khaldun erupted in the most magnificent, joyous celebration ever witnessed. The loss, the sorrow, and the years of despair were washed away by the return of the crown prince and princess. Sultan Shahriman, his heart finally at peace, immediately crowned his son, Kamar al-Zaman, and his beloved daughter-in-law, Budur, as the new rulers of the islands of Khaldun. They reigned together with immense wisdom, justice, and serenity, their love a testament to the power of human will and loyalty over the greatest enchantments. They ruled for many long, peaceful years, their kingdom blessed with prosperity, and their dynasty secured by their noble children. The story of their magical trials, the exchange of the jewels, the abduction by the Jinn, the quest as the merchant Gayer, and the final, harrowing rescue from the sea became the most treasured and endlessly recited legend in all the islands of Caledon, forever reminding the world that the truest love is one that defies both human understanding and the most powerful magic of the spirits. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of the longest and most magical saga we have shared so far, the tale of Prince Kamar, al-Zaman, and Princess Budur. What we learn from this story transcends the boundaries of magic and imagination. It is a testament to the power of unyielding resolve. Remember Princess Budur, who did not simply weep over her fate, but disguised herself as a man and journeyed across oceans in search of her husband. And remember Prince Kamar al-Zaman, who refused to surrender to despair, confronting the mightiest Jinn with the heart of a devoted human. Their love triumphed over the madness of the spirits, the malice of sea giants, the cruelty of fate, and the desolation of separation. The message is clear. When you possess a noble purpose and true love, no force in this world, or even in the magical realms, can prevent you from achieving your destiny. We sincerely hope this epic journey has filled your hearts with tranquility and hope. If you enjoyed this grand adventure, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more magical tales. And always remember, sweet dreams and peaceful rest. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Join us next time for a brand new story from 1001 Nights.